4 minutes after 10. Do you remember when they were telling the lie about austerity being necessitated by Labour's economic policy? Some people still spout this nonsense. You know, the global financial crisis brought about largely by subprime mortgages being sold in America and the packaging up of debt internationally, causing economic collapse across pretty much all of the civilised world. Do you remember it was all Gordon Brown's fault? People still do this. That joke that I forget who it was, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury left on his desk saying all the money had gone. And then people who sadly lack either the wit or the inclination to understand history or politics pretend that was some sort of admission of guilt or something like that. That was all hilarious from one perspective and tragic from another, as with most things fermented by right-wing media in this country. It was an exercise in deluding the British people into both acting against their own interests and blaming entirely the wrong people when things go wrong. But they can't do that now, so it is quite diverting, isn't it, to hear Tories and their supporters in the media trying to make sense of a budget that is necessitated by economic disaster 12 years after the governing party came to power. The slightly ridiculous attempt, you see it a little bit on social media, to blame it all on either coming out of the lockdown or the invasion of Ukraine, falls apart when you look at the performance of other countries. The uniquely British nature of our uniquely British crisis is, well, I mean, however you cut and dice it, it's got to be the responsibility of whoever's been in charge, or in large part the responsibility of whoever's been in charge for the last 12 years. And then you remember yesterday's show when we pointed out that 55 days have passed between Conservative politicians cheering a budget that was the polar opposite of what was announced yesterday. I must have used the phrase polar opposite several thousand times in the course of yesterday's programme, and it's not a particularly felicitous phrase, is it? But it worked, didn't it? Absolute polar opposite. How can they even show their faces in public? 8 members of the current cabinet were in the last one. I couldn't stop thinking about it yesterday. Well, I could actually. I had a rather splendid lunch, which Steve Allen may have shared some details of with you earlier. But I mean, it is absolutely staggering, and we're back there again now. They don't know whether they're coming or going, these newspapers that brought you Brexit, brought you Boris Johnson, cheered Kwasi Kwarteng's diabolical budget to the rafters. They have not got a clue whether they are coming or going. Tories soak the strivers, says the Daily Mail, completely ducking the question of where the hell are they supposed to get the money from to keep the country afloat if they're not going to get it from taxpayers? Where on earth is it going to come from? It is quite bizarre to see a budget that is, I think, with one rather notable flaw. It's essentially sensible, albeit that it's going to hurt, and the pain is a direct consequence of 12 years of Tory rule. Hearing Jeremy Hunt earlier trying to pretend that the decisions they've taken over the last 12 years are somehow creditable, it is objectively staggering that we are where we are, until you remember how much of the national conversation and how much of our political discourse is determined by people who just don't understand anything. I've got a very strong opinion. I am right-wing. I am a Tory, down with Labour, or LIBOR, or whatever you want to call that. I don't understand anything. And I'm not being patronising or condescending. I'm not talking about punters. I'm talking about pundits. I'm talking about people with newspaper columns. Sarah Vine in the Daily Mail today, the ex-wife of Michael Gove, said, I thought we voted for a Conservative government, but we got a Labour budget. You got a budget necessitated by the collapse of the economy brought about by the Conservative government. Things were bad enough 56 days ago, and then Liz Truss came along and set fire to the mess that we were already in. Oh, that's what a skip fire is. It's already rubbish, and then someone sets fire to the rubbish. That's what a skip fire is. There's another phrase I've used several thousand times over the years. And then one Tory MP popped up on television yesterday. I think her name is Vicky Ford. And just told barefaced lies. Kudos to Joe Coburn, the presenter of the programme, who actually had the graph ready. In my first book, or my sort of first book, I said that interviewers, presenters, have to have the numbers. They have to have the figures. The two things you should be hitting politicians over the head with are the statistics and the words that they have previously said themselves. You'll never guess who was at the next table in the restaurant I went to yesterday. You'll never, I may not even tell you. I've had 2 events in the last 48 hours. One was an award ceremony for the Magnitsky Awards that I present every year. It's one of the most moving and profound nights of my year, and this year was no different. Do you know what the most amazing moment was? Last year, the award went to a woman who couldn't be there because she was being held against her will in a Middle Eastern country. So her daughter accepted the award on her behalf. And one of my duties was to bring out the box that she could stand on so that she could reach the lectern. Her name's Gabriella, and her mum's called Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe. And on Wednesday night, Nazanin was able to present an award herself. It's not a good look to start blubbing on stage when you're actually hosting events, but I came about as close as I hope I ever come on that occasion, because Gabriella was there as well, as was Richard, who you know from his many appearances on this programme, including when he was on hunger strike outside the Foreign Office when, in case you're wondering where this is going, when Jeremy Hunt was Foreign Secretary. So Jeremy Hunt's fingerprints are all over the last 12 years of Tory rule. I suspect he's probably the longest serving, not the longest serving, because he fell out of favour under Boris Johnson, didn't he? But in terms of the big jobs, he's done them all pretty much, except the biggest one of all, which he's had a tilt at twice. Dan in Sandbach was clearly up early. He knows exactly who was at the next table for lunch yesterday. Keith doesn't know. I'm not going to tell him. 10 minutes after 10 is the time. So that's just mad. Everything's just crazy. Everything is up in the air. And I don't know what you do if you're a Tory. What do you do? What do you do if you're a Tory? What do you cheer for? What do you believe in? The Daily Mail seems to be attacking your party now, and you do everything the Daily Mail tells you to do. Imagine if I did this job entirely according to what I read in the Daily Mail. I just took that as my guide on what to think and believe about everything. I wouldn't know what to say today about the budget. Luckily, I don't. So I can tell you objectively, it was good. It was a good budget. It was a good autumn statement, but it was a budget in all but name, and a necessary one. But here's the thing. It's quite difficult to pick on the points, the most interesting points to go in on. I mean, traditionally we might talk about how does it affect you, or is it good or bad for you? They need to raise a lot of money because of the mess that we're in, and they can only raise it from taxpayers. But they also need to grow the economy. That's something about which almost everybody agrees. And here is the thing. Here are two headlines for you that are going to form the basis of our first conversation today. 11 minutes after 10 is the time. Headline number one, Hunt relies on migrant surge to boost economy as tax burden hits new high. All right, this is digging into the weeds of what was announced yesterday. You're looking at a surge in net migration to more than 200,000 people a year to deliver the economic growth that Jeremy Hunt has calculated we need. This is the OBR's prediction. The numbers entering the UK minus those leaving is going to hit about 224,000 next year. Dramatically higher than the estimate in March because, very simply, you can't have economic growth without immigration, without quite high immigration. It's also significantly higher than the long-term quotes ambition end quotes of Suella Braverman, who wanted to reduce it to below 100,000, as did Theresa May, one of her predecessors in that job. So that's the first headline. Here's the second one. Hunt targets benefit claimants in search for missing workers. So those are the two pincers, if you like, that are tightening upon the British economy. We need to find more workers. I don't even think that's an opinion. I think that's just counting. We need to find more workers. And here's the question. Where are they going to come from? So Jeremy Hunt thinks there are 600,000 people currently on universal credit who could somehow be eased back into the workforce. There are 630,000 more economically inactive working age people. That means they're neither looking for a job nor in work. I don't know that they can claim much these days by way of state benefits or welfare payments. I think that the newish rules, again, a consequence of 12 years of Tory rule, for good or for ill, then there is a very distinct sense, isn't there, that if you're not actually proving that you're looking for work, they come down on you like a ton of bricks. I mean, you don't need to be watching Ken Loach films to arrive at that conclusion. You just need to talk to someone who's been down what we used to call the job centre lately. So where are these people going to come from? That's the question. I'm going to ask why you're not at work in the British workforce in a minute, which means that the conversation is probably going to steer clear of the immigration issue. Because if you're currently in India, and you are one of the people that we need in the British workforce to bring about anything like the economic growth that Jeremy Hunt is pursuing, the chances are that right now you are not listening to this programme. A sort of an unemployed or loosely employed Indian person who has ambitions to work in the United Kingdom. I've got a big audience internationally. It doesn't get measured properly, unfortunately, but you can tell it's big by the number of people that ring in from overseas. I don't think I have a particularly large following among Indian people in India contemplating a move to the United Kingdom for work. And again, I have to warn you in advance, if you are contemplating that, you'll be called an economic migrant and you'll be treated with contempt by many of the people in the country that you'll be helping to rescue. Just to give you a quick heads up. So, where are these people going to come from? Where are the workers going to come from? 0345 6060 973. Who can answer this question? 2 or 3 people, perhaps? Sorry, no, obviously I need more than 2 or 3 people. 2 or 3 types of people. I mean, I'm good, but I'm not that good. I can't put together a 3-hour radio show with only 2 or 3 people allowed to ring in. Well, John can ring in Dover, Keith in Surbiton, and I'll take a call from Doris in Ongar. No one else is allowed to ring in. No, I'm joking. So where are they going to come from, these people? The 2 or 3 categories, which I loosely expect to be relevant, would be people who are not working but would quite like to. I don't get that at the moment. Do you? 0345 6060 973. We've got more vacancies than almost ever before. I think we have actually got more vacancies than ever before. I paused then to avoid hyperbole, but I think it's actually correct. I don't think that's an opinion. I think that's just counting. The level of job vacancies is absolutely off the charts at the moment. So if you would like to be in work, but you're currently not, I need to know the details, but I don't really think you exist. This is going well, isn't it? 2 or 3 types of people can ring in, and the first type I don't think exists. If you do exist, call me now. Why? Why aren't you in work even though you would like to be? 0345 6060 973. Category number 2, you're not currently working and you don't really want to. What are they going to do with you? I think this is a big category. We've touched on this, haven't we? People who've done their calculations during lockdown in some cases, decided to completely reprioritise, and they've either stepped back to part-time work or they've knocked it on the head altogether and taken a form of early retirement. Now, you may dip in and dip out again of paid employment, but you've got off the treadmill. I don't think there's anything Jeremy Hunt can do to tempt you back onto it, but I could be wrong. So question number 2, or category number 2, why aren't you working? 0345 6060 973. Who are these people that Jeremy Hunt needs to tempt into the workforce? So, you're not currently in work but you would like to be. Call me now. You're not currently in work and you don't want to be. Call me now. And the third category of people, I need a little bit of help with this. I used to be quite good on it, but the world turns, it changes, and if you don't change with it, you're a mongoose. What's it like to be employed? What's it like to be unemployed? I mean, how easy is it to be the mythical lead-swinging, chain-smoking, flat-screen TV-watching, lager-guzzling oaf of tabloid yore? It was always pretty difficult. I mean, the stories about your neighbour's sister's cleaner's best friend's milkman, not milkman, just milkman's brother, not having a job and not doing anything and having more money and going to Ibiza for 6 months. They were always nonsense. They worked very well with the people that we began talking about at the top of this show, people who don't understand anything but regularly accept the invitation from right-wing media to hate on types and people they've never met or encountered. I hate them, all those scrounging work-shy layabouts with their flat-screen televisions. That was a big line when I started at LBC. That was a big sort of tabloid, right-wing tabloid trope. But it was never true. In Leeds at the moment, I'm told that there are about 1,000 applicants for every job going. I've been told this repeatedly by employers over the last 18 months, says VM. So you're sort of going, okay, I'm sick of hearing about this because I'm stuck in 0-hour temporary work. All the vacancies you're talking about are concentrated in London, where house prices are too high for us to move. There's an answer already to the question. I'm one of these people that would like to be in the workforce, but I can't live in the places where the jobs are because the wages aren't high. So I don't know. There's your answer. Where are these people going to come from? If you want to bring immigration into it, you can. But I don't know that the country's ready. I don't know that the Gammon and Pineapple Party is ready yet for a conversation about how they have necessitated the inwards immigration of hundreds of thousands of people from Southeast Asia, especially if you voted for Brexit because you don't like brown people. How are you going to process this one? Again, a direct consequence of what you were persuaded to vote for by the people who today are telling you, I don't know what they're telling you today, actually. They don't know what to tell you, do they? 56 days ago, it was the finest Tory budget in generations, the best budget of my lifetime. And today they're cross about this one, which is going to fix some of the damage done by the last one. Happy days. It's 10:19. 22 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Two headlines for you. Hunt relies on migrant surge to boost economy as tax burden hits new high. And Hunt targets benefit claimants in search for, quotes, missing, end quotes, workers. It's pretty clear that we need an influx of working people. Where are they going to come from? 0345 6060 If you can't get through, keep trying. I'll try and rattle through some calls. Josh is in Barnet. Josh, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Right, where are the people going to come from? In the last 7 days, myself and my business partners have been to 2 high-end London 5-star hotels for meetings.
Get you.
Dinner meetings, I know. Don't worry, it doesn't happen often. In both hotels, we noticed that going on for probably 95% of the staff, who were fantastic, were all Italian.
Okay.
The only British person in both hotels seemed to be the porter.
That's not new, though, is it? I mean, hospitality in London particularly has been non-British for as long as I can remember.
Yeah. But the discussion we were having is, I mean, these across London, you've got amazing hospitality, restaurants, hotels.
But you've also got vacancies in pretty much every establishment going.
Yeah, but what we were discussing is where are the young British?
Don't fancy it.
Why are they not coming to work in these establishments?
They don't fancy
beautiful
it.
Establishments.
Yeah, they don't fancy it. They all
want to work in cheap sport shops and.
Well, no, let's
shops.
not overly generalise in that way. Although I take your point, I think that there are two answers to your question. I don't know how relevant they are to the bigger picture because hospitality is not something that is respected enough in this country. If you go to Italy, if you go to Greece, I know Southern Europe better than I know Northern Europe, but I don't think it's different in Scandinavia and Germany. It's a proper career, being a maitre d'. Look at Fred Sirex off that programme on he's in everything at the moment, Fred, isn't he? But he is, he's a maitre d'. That's a profession. My friend Nico Ladinis, the great chef, his family are very much in the business of reminding people that hospitality is a wonderful profession. But he's Greek originally. It's not a British thing. That we don't see it incorrectly, in my view, but we don't see it as a career. I had a very posh lunch yesterday, and all of the staff were from overseas. It's just not, it was a very smart restaurant, so they would have that on their CV, and they will move through the restaurant, and they'll move through the world. Luckily, the European people, of course, can still live and work in 27 other countries. So that's part of the problem. But I don't think British youngsters fancy it. The problem is, if that hotel now had 20 vacancies, how would it fill them?
You're right. I think a major problem with the British as well is the British traditionally have been brought up to want a young British one. They want to own their own property. I think the property market is a major reason for job vacancies as well.
How do you mean?
I just think that people can't afford to take certain jobs or don't want to take.
Yeah, but I don't get this. I don't understand. So you mean they don't do anything?
I think a lot of them may be.
Well, that's who we're looking for, isn't it? I'll add that as the fourth category. So young people who've chosen not to work. Because, what would they live on? Are they living at home? Are there hundreds of thousands of people in their 20s living at home and sort of playing PlayStation all day because mum and dad are still paying all the bills? I don't know. You don't know. It's an answer. It's a possibility. We don't know where these people are going to come from. If they're currently in the country but not in work, who are they? Where are they? And we haven't even mentioned illness, health, long COVID, waiting lists. Good Lord. Jane's in... Thank you, Josh. Jane's in Chingford. Jane, what would you like to say?
So I'm a first-time caller, so I'm a bit nervous. But anyway, it's only you. I know we're having a conversation. So I'm a very fortunate person. I'm in my early 50s. I've had a great career in IT. I've saved hard. And then during COVID, we learned how to live on less. So we've, I've walked away because it's too stressful, too much responsibility. Work's getting harder and harder, I think, as a manager, as in any business. I mean, I worked in the private sector, but it's just getting harder and harder. And I just think there's a whole raft of 50 pluses who are just saying enough. I know a pharmacist that's skilled people, skilled professionals who are in an unfortunate position to say, well, actually, I've got enough squirreled away that I can choose to walk away. And I think Britain's
so you've cut your cloth accordingly. Here's another example as well from someone in their early 60s. I started work in the early 80s when Tories were encouraging me to get a pension, so I did. I can now afford to retire at 63. Surely this is a great Tory success. Why are they complaining that I'm not in work? It's another twist on the same story. What was it? What is it? I mean, has the workplace, because we're a similar age, but I've got such a weird job, I'm not really qualified to comment. Has the workplace generally become a less happy place, do you think? Do you think that...
I think so. I think it's... I've always been in a fortunate position where I've always loved my job, and it got to a point where I didn't love it anymore. And bosses... I don't think managers are appreciated anymore. It's a hard job.
Yeah, it could be part of the pyramidization of our economy, the way that all of the energy has gone into funneling more and more upwards to a tiny number of people, and it means that the wages, because all of the things you describe would be a lot easier to deal with if you felt that you were being handsomely rewarded, wouldn't they, or well paid?
To be fair, I was being well paid.
Right. I scratched that.
I was being well paid, but you get to a point where you think, actually, this is not what I want anymore, and actually I can live on a lot less, and it's I'm embarrassed when people say to me, what do you do? I say... I said retired, but then I get really embarrassed about it. And then I just say, actually, I'm a freelancer and I'm just not on contract at the moment, because it's sort of embarrassing.
Why is it embarrassing?
Because of the context of the time that we're living in. It just feels...
Well, you're embarrassed that you can afford to be retired. Yes. Oh, okay. Yes. Okay, that's very British, isn't it?
It's very British. And also, I've started looking at volunteering.
That's not part of it.
And I'm looking at volunteering. But it's like everything, isn't it? You want to give back. I want to help.
You're lovely.
But I think there's a huge swathe of people out there who would like to still help and contribute. But how do you do that?
But you don't want to be in the rat race. You don't want to be on the hamster wheel. I bet there are lots of people in your position.
I think so. I think we all see the situation that our country's in, and it breaks my heart. And you sort of think, well, have I been part of the problem? Living in my little bubble of everything's okay, and I've known over the years that things are going wrong, and then now you see it and you sort of think, have I contributed to it? I hope I haven't.
No, of course you have. Well, I mean, if you have, I'm pretty, it's negligible, so please don't worry about it. You've earned the right to put your feet up a bit. You've clearly worked hard, and you've said you've endured stresses over the years. If you can afford to do it, I very simply say good luck to you. I really do. There is a subtext to some of the coverage today about the front page of the Mail is particularly hilarious, about the Tories soaking strivers as if you're supposed to raise money from people who aren't earning any. So talk us through that, Daily Mail, please. How are you going to raise money from people who aren't earning any? How are you going to put income tax on people with no income? That's weird. And of course, the point Jane reminds us of is that people who have just decided that they can live without working because of wise financial decisions that they've taken previously, or luck, serendipitous pay packages or whatever it may be, that they are the kind of people Jeremy Hunt is talking about. I think that's probably going to be the biggest category. I don't want to work. I don't work and I don't want to work, and I'm not a drain on the state, so get lost. Fair play. It's a problem. 10:31 is the time. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. 10:36 is the time. Probably going to talk about Twitter at 12, possibly sooner, because I have no idea what's going on. Twitter is absolutely full of people both leaving and attacking the new owner Elon Musk at the same time. In America, Democrats are now calling for an investigation into his behaviour after he gave employees a deadline of yesterday to decide whether to leave or stay. Lots have decided to leave. Hashtag Twitter migration is trending. Everywhere you turn, people are slagging off Elon Musk and leaving Twitter in their droves. My inbox is full of things saying like this: if Twitter does collapse, I'm not sure I believe that it will, then I just want to say thanks to the following brilliant people on here, and then a list of Twitter handles which I'm very flattered to be including in, and I'm getting quite a few of those. those. So that is people who are voting, it would appear, with their feet. But A, why? And B, what does it all mean? Is it all over? I hope not. I'd really like it. And it's only recently, typical that, isn't it? I should have known as soon as I hit 1 million followers, the whole flipping thing's going to fall to pieces. So we'll start talking about that at 12. And the reason I'm giving you an early heads up is because I don't get it. I'm normally quite good on Twitter stuff. You know, when you hear people talking about Twitter who clearly have no idea how it works or what it's about, I am not one of those people. TikTok, I'd sound like an idiot if I started talking about TikTok. But Twitter, I actually usually know what I'm talking about, but not today. So we shall hopefully enlist some help come 12. Before that, where are all the workers going to come from? Dan's in Burton-on-Trent. Dan, what would you like to say?
Hi,
Hello,
first-time caller, long-time listener.
Thank you, welcome.
But I feel like I need to speak up on this. Funnily enough, I had a conversation with my dad about this very situation a couple of days ago. I'm progressively disabled. Basically, it's getting worse and worse, to the point it will be in a wheelchair eventually. There are days I cannot get out of bed.
Yeah.
Today is unfortunately one of those.
I'm sorry
but
to hear
I
that.
am stuck in a situation where I now can't afford to not have a job.
Right.
But all the jobs available to me locally are either care work or in sort of warehouses.
Gosh.
Stuff I can't do, manual work.
Yes.
I've had this conversation with my dad recently, and he basically turned around with the same sort of rhetoric, being a Tory voter, of why don't you just work? Where's this money coming from? We're paying for it. You need to work.
Right.
And it's just
that's not very nice. I'm sorry. You have to. I'm really sorry that you have to put up with that. That sounds very unfair.
It's very difficult because we have a very close relationship. But
does he not understand how poorly you are, or does what? I don't quite get that bit. Sorry.
He does, and he has seen it, and I think that's what hurts the most about it. To be honest,
yeah.
He is very aware of the situation, and he does express what he can do to.
What job does he think you could or should be doing? What does he think you could or should be doing?
I'm not entirely sure. We have discussed, obviously, doing work from home admin stuff, and this leads me on to the next point.
Right.
A lot of employers also require flexible work,
yes,
which requires you to be in the office as well. I can't get out of bed some days, so there's some days where that may not be feasible. I have been applying for these jobs and just sort of hoping that I can dose myself up and get myself to it if that ever was the case, but I'm at the point now where I want to, but the jobs available to me are still very unsuitable. So I don't really know where they're going to find.
What will you live on?
They're saying. Well, this is the problem. My partner works full time.
Okay.
I'm on PIP, and we're struggling to make ends meet. So I honestly don't know what I'm going to be living on. So it's a point that I've got to find a job.
I mean, in
a
way,
like I've been forced into it.
You'd be luckier than if you were single, of course. I mean, but equally, what is the job you're supposed to find?
Well, this is it. I'm completely at a loss, but I feel like it's kind of intentionally been pushed that way because the benefits don't necessarily match up to what the living costs are. No, of course they don't. And that's one of the greatest myths of our age, isn't it? This idea that people who are often very much against their will and very much, far from being their ideal situation, dependent upon the welfare state for either all or part of their income. The idea that you get it easy, the idea that you're in clover is so disgusting. And I fear people like your dad believe it. Unfortunately, I think you're quite right. I think you're right.
I mean, anyone who's got any advice will happily pass it on down. It's just the idea of it's kind of piecemeal work almost, isn't it? That you need to be able to earn when you can work. But obviously you can't get a job where you are required to work all day, every day, like a normal full-time job, because there are days when you can't get out of bed. I think the health element, so we'll put the voluntary retirement down. So voluntary early retirement is going to be big. And then can't work in the ways that employers want or demand, but would like to work. Can work, but can't work is an odd way of phrasing it, but that pretty much sums up Dan's position. I can work, but I can't get a job because the jobs are not tailored to people like me, which seems like a dreadful waste. Intelligent, committed, enthusiastic people who are poorly and some days can't work because of their illness, because of their disability, or their, there it is, that's category number 2. 1041. And of course, there'll be a big uptick in that with the consequences of long COVID that is still probably not getting anything like the level of reporting that it demands and deserves. Dan, take care, mate. Julietta is in Croydon. Julietta, what would you like to say?
Hi, thanks for having me on this morning.
You're very welcome.
I'm part of the group that wants to work,
right.
But can't, and this is because of childcare issues. I feel like there's a big group here that hasn't been included in the discussion.
Oh, it's only 10:42, Julietta. I've got to you as quickly as I can. Everyone's a critic, honestly.
No, but it's tough because it's, I believe, middle class people, skilled people that, from my perspective, do want to work and that are out of work from the ages of 2 to 4, and that's given that you're given 1 year of maternity leave. You don't get free childcare help until your child is about 3. And so what do you do those 2 years in between? You don't work.
You are in the category of I can't afford to work.
I can't afford to, because we can't afford to put our kids in full-time childcare, and we don't qualify for universal credit, which I believe does pay.
You could, if you went back to work, you'd be paying pretty much all of your income on the childcare.
Oh yeah, every penny.
So it becomes a relatively pointless exercise, albeit that some people do it. It must feel so dispiriting to know that you'd probably rather be with your child during those formative years in an ideal world, but you can't really afford to do that, except that it's even more financially damaging to go to work than it is to not go to work by the time you've paid for the... Wow. And there must be loads of people like you. Did you have friends in the same boat?
Basically, all of my friends are in the same boat, and even for those that want to work part-time, even 1 or 2 days, it's tough. Some people have tried, including myself, to work from home with the child there.
Right.
And as many people that are listening can probably imagine, that's far from ideal. It's an absolute nightmare, and it does a number to your mental health, as people found out during the pandemic.
Of course.
So,
I get it. And of course, in the southeast, this is more likely to be a problem in the southeast where the vacancies are, because if you're in the southeast, you're less likely to have mum and dad round the corner who can often step in for the old free childcare.
Exactly.
You're on the list.
Yeah.
The category is now included, Julietta. Better late than never.
Lovely.
Thank you.
So much.
Hang on. When the little one goes to school, will you go back to work, do you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I love my kids to bits, but,
Sure.
I'd be lying if I said I didn't
miss work.
I didn't miss being at work.
Adult company. Adult company.
Exactly.
Well, I shall fill the void. I shall fill the void until that day dawns by keeping you company every morning, Julietta. I shall do my best. Thank you. There it is. How's Jeremy Hunt going to get Julietta back to work? Answer: free childcare. There you go. That's actually quite easy to do, but it would cost money. And where's the money going to come from? Income tax. Where's the income tax going to come from? Getting people like Julietta to go back to work. So the problem she faces on a micro level, there's no point me going back to work because every single penny I earn would go on childcare, becomes a macro level. If she goes back to work, we'd have to spend some of the money she's paying in tax on providing the childcare that she would need. I'd still do it. I think probably it'd be a net gain, but it would be public spending. And of course, the much of the media, if not the current iteration of the Tory party, which is the polar opposite of the one from 56 days ago, much of the media still likes to follow the Tufton Street Kool-Aid on the idea of public spending being a bad thing. 10:45 is the time. 10:49 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Reese is in Cardiff. It says, a lot of young people are living at home longer, no rent, no bills to pay, and they're making money in different ways, whether making viral videos or buying and selling clothes and trainers, in a lot of cases turning to crime. What? Didn't see that coming. For the little bit of cash they need just for weed and to go out on the weekends. It's not hard to survive when you don't have rent bills or have to buy food. There's a reckoning on the way, though, isn't there? By the way, weed is illegal. Don't do drugs, kids. There's a reckoning on the way because Jane's call, was it Jane who has taken a form of early retirement, which she's a bit too embarrassed to talk about? That's not going to be an option for the generations coming through. They're not going to have anything like the A, job security, B, pensions in place, or C, wages to have savings by the time. So if you're in your 20s now, when you're in your 50s, that's not going to be an option. So that's a form of reckoning. That's a form of recalibration. And at some point, young people's parents are not going to be able to sustain them. If the cost of living carries on like this and wages fail to keep track with inflation, everybody's worse off. having the beloved teenagers in the house, essentially just draining income. I don't know, but I'd be fascinated to know how many people there are. I know some teenagers who, the ones I know are still at school, actually. They're sixth form age, but they do a bit of trading. There's a special word for it. I've forgotten what it is, but they do trading online. They do kind of have little shops set up on it. Is it Etsy? They have little shops set up on Etsy, and they have suppliers in China, and they advertise stuff for sale, and then they buy it and ship it. It's like a middleman. They've introduced themselves to the economic chain, and that I mean, I know one lad told me he was making about £500-600 a month. Now, if you're living with your mum and dad, and all you have to have money for is socialising, that's sustainable for a period of time. They're the people Jeremy Hunt is going to try to get them into the workplace. How's it going to work if they don't want to be in the workplace? I don't get out of bed till lunchtime. I go out when I want to go out. I've generally got just about enough money to do what I want to do. Why on earth would I want to become a wage slave, as they used to be called? Hadib is in Banbury. Hadib, what would you like to say?
Hey, hello, James.
Hello.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome.
First-time caller. So a bit nervous.
Don't be.
Okay, so first off, I really enjoy your sarcasm. I think it should be studied in universities.
I agree. I agree. We could start. I mean, let's create some jobs there as well. We could have a whole faculty of people teaching my sarcasm, and that would create at least 100 jobs. Great.
I know,
Thank
right?
you.
Yeah, so I wanted to provide two answers to two of the questions you asked because I've experienced it. So one of your questions was, what does it feel like to be unemployed? So I'm one of those people who wanted to be in jobs and didn't have a job for like 6 months straight. Eventually, I'm in a job now, thankfully. So yeah, I do want to be in job, and I have a job at the moment. But what does it feel like? It's James, I can assure you, it's terrible. I don't know people who do it. I don't know how they survive. As a migrant, as a legal migrant who has been in the UK for a year now, when you're not employed, it's near impossible to survive because regardless of your status, no one cares. You still have to pay your bills.
Right.
The landlord doesn't want to know if you're not being employed or not. And for me, why wasn't I employed? It was because of the weird clauses that are in the UK labour force. So one of the things I experienced when I came in, I'm a skilled worker.
Yes.
I work in tech. I do cybersecurity. But when I came into the country with my wife, who is a student,
yes.
one of the challenges I had was all the good tech jobs, well-paying jobs, were in London, and we stay in Oxfordshire. We can't afford to be in London. So that was one of the many reasons my applications were rejected. Once they saw my address, my postcode, they were like, nah, you're too far. But how will I survive without the job? So that's one. Two, there are certain professional opportunities that are not available to you if you're not in the UK in the last 3 years, which I find ridiculous because it's not a question of skill or competence. It's a question of existence. Oh, you've not been in this country for up to 3 years, therefore you're not qualified. How? Why?
Well, that's hostile environment territory, isn't it? That's the political landscape designed to almost to deter people like you from getting jobs, which is patently ridiculous.
I lost several fantastic professional opportunities of growth simply because I've only been in the UK for less than a year.
That's crazy.
Not because I was incompetent.
No, I understand. I do understand. Yeah. So you've got a job now.
Yeah, eventually I did. But now that leads to my second answer to the other question you asked about where would Jeremy Hunt get the labour force?
Hang on a minute, Hadib. I just need to tell her this is a textbook caller. This is what I expect from my callers. He's working his way through all of the questions that I've asked. He's not even letting me interrupt him. He started with a bit of a compliment, so I've relaxed. I've sat back, and now he's providing chapter and verse. I think there's going to be. I think I've got something interesting to say at the end of this, but I shall let you finish first, Hadib.
Well, all right. Maybe because I've listened to you since I got here, so I've learned.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Well, yeah. So here's the thing. I believe there is an ignored gap in the UK labour force that is being intentionally ignored. And that is where the answer to your next question is coming from. You know those migrants that come into the UK as students?
Yes.
When they finish, they're not leaving the UK. Their aim was not to come and learn get that knowledge and then leave. They're going to join the workforce. But because of those hostile situations that we've just talked about, they end up doing those other jobs that a typical British person is not going to do.
Right.
So that's where the workforce is going to come from. When the other caller mentioned,
so we're going to have overqualified, unskilled workers.
Exactly, which is already happening. It's already happening.
Whereas because they can't get the jobs that would utilise their qualifications for the reasons that you've mentioned. Well, it's incredible. And that's designed so that politicians can make essentially hollow statements about basic numbers, isn't it? That's designed.
Exactly.
Well, that's okay. Here's the good news. I think, from what I have seen of Jeremy Hunt, I don't know yet about Rishi Sunak. I think that your category, particularly that requirement, residency requirement, might be precisely the sort of thing that they actually have a look at, because it would make perfect sense to do so. The only problem they've got is a party full of people who get fat upon hatred of people from overseas. So that's their challenge, as people who seem to be relatively relaxed about immigration, both Sunak and Hunt, is that they now lead a party that is rabidly opposed to immigration in large part. But if they can, if good sense can prevail, I think that's precisely the sort of crazy loophole that they might actually try to close.
Yeah, honestly, because it just keeps getting wider and wider. You know, I mean, so the government did mention it, the amount of people that are coming in on student visa. These people are not living in the next 10 years. Because that's the plan. It's a game plan. They've come into the UK to get education, so they can use that education to prolong their stay in the UK and eventually become permanent residents and grow to become citizens.
It's psychological, emotional, political, intellectual. We should be putting arms around people and rolling out nice warm welcomes and making people feel valued and cherished and all of those things, Hadib. And I hope that listening to this programme you do feel all of those things, because it is, you know, it is not a common experience in the British. Well, in the British Isles, actually, we've got to be fairly honest about it. It's not just the workplace, is it? It must be awful to be here from overseas, open up a newspaper or turn on your radio one day and you're being lumped in with all sorts of wrong-uns and ne'er-do-wells. But not on this show, never on this show. Thank you, Hadib. That's a really good point. I mean, I want to work and I can't because of some relatively silly regulations and restrictions put in place from the days when the Home Office was dedicated to creating a hostile environment. Victor is in Westminster. Victor, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Second time caller.
Welcome. Welcome.
I'm going to explain to you why people left and why they don't want to come back.
Yeah.
So I'm originally from Romania, and most of my friends, they have left. That's because there has been the situation of Brexit and the pandemic.
Yes.
And what I wanted to say is that, for example, Romania has the highest percentage of people owning their own homes in the world. Wow. 92% of Romanians own their own homes, which means there's no mortgage. Now, if you've been working in the UK for 5-10 years, then you put aside 20, 30, 40, 50,000 all these years that you've worked, and then for 2 years you don't work and you have to pay from your savings the rent, people have decided, instead of paying 2 years of the rent, I'm going to go back home, get a small loan from the bank, and I'm going to start my own business. So this means they restart their life back home, so there's no incentive to come back, because what they come back for £12 an hour and pay £400 in British gas bills. And
a distinct sense of not being very welcome here, which has been in place since 2016, thanks to Nigel and his mates.
That's the second thing. Yeah. So that's the reason they're not coming back.
That's pretty straightforward. And I mean, the question of who is going to replace you and your compatriots is, I mean, looking at the numbers, it's going to be people from much, much further away and from much weaker economies, because some of the Eastern European countries are set to overtake the United Kingdom. You're probably going to have economic migrants going in the other direction. We'll all be heading out to Romania in about 10 years' time.
Another problem is, James, that, for example, I have a business degree from Kingston University here in the UK, right?
Yes.
And I'm doing Uber. Right. Is because also companies, they don't want to invest in people to retrain them. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lack of skills in some of jobs, and the companies themselves, they don't want to help people retrain. So they're looking, when they advertise, you need this job, whatever, blah blah blah, and they say 5 years experience. How are they going to get that experience?
If no one will give them a start, no one will give them a break. It's not a dissimilar situation from Hadib's, and of course it's also probably part of the other constituency of people who are still living at home, because, you know, and just sort of living quite an odd cash in hand to mouth existence, because there's no entry level jobs that would tempt them into economic activity. Why, if you don't mind me asking, Victor, why are you still here? Why haven't you followed your mates back to Romania?
So I've been here now 15 years, James.
Right, and so your life is here.
Yeah, I have my daughter here. She was about 4 when we came, so she got through the school and everything.
Yes.
And now she went back home in July for 1 month.
Right.
Bear in mind that we were some family situation, and we haven't been back since we came. So when she was 4, came here, went after 15 years home,
Gosh.
and she started crying that she doesn't want to come back.
Oh, you've got. Yeah, I mean, crikey, there's a lot to cover there, isn't there?
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, what do I do now? But I see the quality of life now. In the 15 years, I have witnessed how everything is going so down.
Yes.
It's like unbelievable. And I don't know, you guys. I think the UK needs a Vlad the Impaler.
What you did? You've made me late for the news, but it was worth the wait, Victor. It is now 1 minute after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I'm a lot clearer now on what's going on, but no clearer at all on how Jeremy Hunt is going to tempt any of the constituencies of people that we've been talking about back into the workplace. Time now for the news. It's 4 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Listen, sometimes perhaps you think I exaggerate, but I promise you I don't. I'm going to give you a little masterclass in how the UK media, how the right-wing UK media works, okay? I'll give you two, actually. There's a column in the Daily Telegraph today, which harks back to the last conversation we were having, which I have now knocked on the head with apologies to Joe, to George. George is actually in Bulgaria. I told you I had a large foreign audience. Richard, Scott, Rob, Gemma, Moise and Quincy, my apologies. We probably will be returning to this subject at some point in the future because it seems to me to be one of the biggest issues around. But someone called Judith Woods, who has a column in the Daily Telegraph, is writing about British people. Here you go. The columnist in the Daily Telegraph believes... But back to Twitter, which is the conversation we're going to have in the next hour, and Elon's eccentric belief that hardcore or quit will achieve anything other than a swathe of voluntary redundancies here in lazy bones Britain. The only thing the average member of the British labour force wants to go and get is another latte. I've got to tell you, I can't think of an easier job than being a newspaper columnist. I am quite a lazy person in some ways, not in others, but one of the main reasons why, before I discovered the joys of broadcasting, my ultimate career goal would have been to be a well-paid newspaper columnist is because it is money for old rope. It's the easiest money you will ever earn in your life. It never occurred to me that if you're lucky enough to have a job that is designed for lazy show-offs, one of the things you could use that platform for, as Judith Woods has done in the Daily Telegraph today, is to slag off people who've got proper jobs. It's a beautiful microcosm of how the Daily Telegraph editorial thinks of British people. You're all lazy. You're all lazy, work-shy layabouts. By the way, I write one column a week or whatever. She probably writes more. So that's part of the problem, of course. The political discourse creates the idea that everybody except newspaper columnists is lazy. But this is a much more important little masterclass in how right-wing media in this country works. There's a columnist in the Daily Mail called Jan Moyer. She writes today under this headline, "Why have so many Liberals mislaid their morals over Qatar just in time for kick-off?" There's a picture of Gary Lineker there, which is like a dartboard for Daily Mail sensibilities. I'll give you a little taste of it. "The tournament starts on Sunday, but it remains an outrage that it is being held in Qatar. An outrage that should horrify all civilised people. How and why the international football world has turned a blind eye to Qatar's failing as a modern country is one of the scandals of the age. Instead of giving this morally bereft nation the cold shoulder, the World Cup has been bequeathed to it with the stamp of global approval. I just don't understand. Is it a guy thing?" Have you ever heard of Daily Mail Group Events, a company called DMG Events, part of the Daily Mail and General Trust? DMG Events is the events arm of the Mail publisher, DMGT. It has a business opening and running conferences all around the world. Guess where the Daily Mail events business opened an office in 2017. The newspaper that today prints this. "It remains an outrage that it has been held in Qatar, an outrage that should horrify all civilised people." Guess where the Daily Mail events business opened an office in 2017? Go on, have a guess. I'll give you a clue. 4 letters. It's got O in the middle, like my nickname, James O'Brien. Doha. That's a good quiz question. What have James O'Brien and Qatar got in common? Doha. They opened an actual office in Doha. Their president with responsibility for Middle East, Asia and Africa, "Establishing a presence in Qatar is an important strategic move for us," said Matt Denton, president of DMG Events, Middle East, Asia and Africa. The tournament starts on Sunday, but it remains an outrage that it is being held in Qatar, says Jan Moyer, Daily Mail columnist. Back to Matt Denton. It brings with it access to a market of significant potential as the country's preparations for the FIFA World Cup 2020 continue apace. How and why the international football world has turned a blind eye to Qatar's failings as a modern country is one of the scandals of the age, is actually published in the Daily Mail today. The president of Daily Mail Events, Middle East, Asia and Africa, goes on, we also have the honour, I've got the voices wrong, we also have the honour of being the first events company to establish itself in Qatar. That's how it works. Here is an invitation from one of the highest paid columnists to you to get cross with Gary Lineker for going to Qatar to commentate on the Football World Cup. Published in a newspaper that has an events arm, literally boasting about being the first events business to open in Qatar. That's how it works. Rarely do you come across such a beautiful example of the contempt in which the Daily Mail and all of its acolytes and the broadcasting equivalents hold their audience. Absolute contempt. You are so stupid, you're going to accept this invitation to have a swing at Gary Lineker, who incidentally is one of those liberals who has opened up his home to refugees, although people like to gloss over that when they're offering up stupid observations. Why don't you put them all in your house then? Invitation to hate Gary Lineker for doing his job in a country that they have boasted about being the first to open an events company in. Since then, they've gone from strength to strength. They now organise events in Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Qatar itself. In fact, this year, DMG Events signed a partnership with a Qatar-based firm to run 2 big expos in Qatar. The Big Five Construct Qatar and Index Design Qatar, both in 2023. Oh, inevitably, they're also having a crack at David Beckham for being the face of the World Cup. Why has Beckham turned a blind eye to racism, misogyny and homophobia in Qatar? They wrote in 2021. But today, they've got a column saying that instead of giving this morally bereft nation the cold shoulder the World Cup has been bequeathed to it with the stamp of global approval, the parent company has another business in which the president wrote, we also have the honour of being the first events company to establish itself in Qatar. And that is why I said at the beginning of that little spiel that you might sometimes think I exaggerate how diabolical the influence of this kind of so-called journalism is on our country. But that is one of the best examples you'll ever find. Hate Lineker, hate Beckham, hate. Hang on a minute. Hang on, just 1 minute. Hang on a second. And there it is. Rarely, in fact, do you find such a beautiful example of the hypocrisy at the heart of that kind of so-called journalism. 11 after 11 is the time. Football. I think it's actually much messier than I previously thought. Oh, and I should, as Randall in Thurrock points out, that story is from this week's Private Eye, which you absolutely should buy every fortnight. It is by far the most effective organ for speaking truth to power in this country, and there it is. That's where I got the story about DMG Events from. Football. World Cup, Qatar. That's the topic. 0345 6060 973. Is it fair to criticise anybody for being involved in it? Yeah, because if you're taking a lead from the Daily Mail, they are treating you like a complete muppet. They're happy to suck cash out of the country. They boast about being there to do business, but they'll encourage you to give Gary Lineker a hard time for the crime of doing his job. Quite bizarre, right? 0345 6060 973. So we broke it down last week because it starts on Sunday. So by the next time we speak to each other, the World Cup will be underway, which is remarkable for 2 reasons. Well, it's remarkable for one reason, really. There's so little excitement about it. I haven't even got a Figuerini Panini album or a wobbly wall chart. There's a couple in the papers today, but I mean, the sense, what's it like for the kids? Are the youths getting excited about it? I genuinely don't know. But I do know this. It will be underway. It kicks off on Sunday, so come Monday, we'll be talking about it. It is a rancid regime in Qatar, but, you know, Boris Johnson was boasting about 10 billion quid's worth of business being signed with one of the head honchos, if not the head honcho, the Emirate. I just think that the attempt to attack footballers is ridiculous. I could be wrong. I mean, let me see if... Here you go. Katie's drinking the Kool-Aid. It just proves that liberals are as hypocritical as the Daily Mail columnist. Hands up, who's surprised? What? No hands, how surprising. Why would a football commentator be required to advocate on human rights issues? That's a job for newspaper columnists and politicians. So for a newspaper columnist to be supping from the same trough commercially as an events company in actual Qatar while slagging off Gary Lineker for being a football commentator is palpably ridiculous. There might be a different case for David Beckham's involvement. So Beckham takes a reported 10 million quid in response or in return for being a brand ambassador. Beckham is a gay icon. This is why Joe Lycett has targeted him with a well-publicised offer to shred £10,000 if Beckham doesn't step down as an ambassador for the World Cup. That is possibly different morally, but I read you that list of companies that the Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund is involved in, everything from Severn Trent Water right through to Canary Wharf. Qatari money is getting Qatari money out of the UK economy would be like trying to get eggs out of a baked cake. God, that's one of my favourite lines, that. Just to describe Brexit. Getting the United Kingdom out of the European Union. It'd be like trying to get eggs out of a baked cake. And my God, we're learning that now, aren't we? There might be a different argument morally for David Beckham, but I'm not sure that there should be. Certainly, Gary Neville took a kicking off Ian Hislop and everyone was queuing up to attack Gary Neville. There's two questions here. The one is obvious, which is, is it completely unfair to single out people associated with football for associating with a country that... Didn't it give 2 million quid in used notes to Prince Charles not long ago? I'm pretty sure they gave suitcases full of cash to Prince Charles when he was Prince Charles. 03456060973 is the number that you need. And the other question is, why do the right-wing media do this? Is it an attempt, as our correspondent there unintentionally provided, Katie there, is it an attempt to offer solace to callous people, that people who sometimes demonstrate concern for others, trying to portray them as just as bad as the racists? So if you are, for example, someone who believes refugees deserve compassion and care, then they desperately need to pretend that you are secretly just as awful as the people who want to send gunboats out to take pot shots at dinghies in the English Channel. Is that what they're doing? I mean, why would someone who works for a company that boasts about being the first events company to open in Doha write an article attacking Gary Lineker and David Beckham for doing their jobs in Doha? I don't get it. So question number one, is it actually unfair to attack? And I very, very rarely would you find me disagreeing with Ian Hislop. I have the pleasure of knowing him, and he is every bit as charming and erudite and brilliant in person as he is on the telly. But when he went for Gary Neville, I like everyone else, I was enjoying it as a little bit. Oh dear, he's going to get out of that one, Gary. But the more I've thought about it since, if you're not boycotting everything from Severn Trent Water to Canary Wharf, and I think Harrods as well. I mean, we had the list everywhere, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. Then why are you going after footballers and football commentators? There you go. 03456060973 is the number you need. It's 11:17. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. Slagging Gary Lineker off for not getting involved in politics, that's novel, except, of course, he has. He said quite a lot about the Qatari regime. And to the best of my knowledge, he doesn't work for a company that boasts about all the business that it does in Qatar, as every single Daily Mail columnist does. Funny old world, isn't it? However, some of you already taking issue with me. Bryn sent me a nice message from Bristol. James, you're letting us down here. Anyone who is paid to be there is profiting from human rights abuses, and by going there, they are acting as if the behaviour of the Qatari government is okay. Footballers themselves probably have very little choice, but Gary Neville and David Beckham can walk away and protest from home about this. And that may well be true. I may be wrong, because I'm kind of arguing that unless everybody does it, then you're not allowed to criticise others. So unless you boycott everything from Severn Trent Water to Canary Wharf, and what was I'm going to check. I should have checked during the break actually, because you can hear me Googling now, and you know that I'm not just plucking it. Yeah, here you go. Prince Charles was given €3 million in cash. Come on. Prince Charles, before he became king, accepted bags containing millions of euros in cash during meetings with a senior Qatari politician. Where's Jan Moyer's column about him? Where's all the right-wing newspapers getting furious with the king, who took €3 million in cash from the former Prime Minister of Qatar? One was in a Fortnum & Mason carrier bag, ironically enough. The money was intended for his charitable causes, but anyway, let's find out. Sohail is in the United Arab Emirates. What do you think, Sohail?
Hi, James. How you doing, mate?
I'm very good. I'm interested in this question. Am I going to be able to predict from your geography where you're going to sit on this particular issue, or would that be presumptuous of me?
Ooh. Well, let me just say, because I've got a Muslim-sounding name, I expect many people listening might think I was going to take sides and say, this is all very sort of innocuous, what's happening. And no, that's not my position. Okay. I mean, look, there are clear human rights issues in the Arabian Gulf, but we didn't discover them, just a few years ago. Oh. They've been around for quite some time. And so I think there's another question that we need to ask is, why are we having this discussion? Every time there a nation hosts an international event like this, do we suddenly take out our checklist and say, well, let's look at the human rights records here, and then start making a big fuss about big celebrities who happen to be associated in some form with the country? I just think that a lot of this has to do with, and I'm just going to come out and say, the fact that this is the first Muslim Arab country that's hosting this. And the Arabian Gulf states, because of the money they have, they are countries that we love to hate, because they flash their cash and they do these really I think there's an element to that.
Yeah, I mean, one would think of Russia and China as being appalling human rights records and places that have hosted massive international sporting events as well, which adds some weight to your point. But I think most of the early focus has gone in on migrant workers being treated appallingly and the homophobic laws that are in place. And they are. Have you realised, James, if I may interrupt? Yeah, hang on. Let me finish before you interrupt me. Let me finish interrupting you before you interrupt me. I think that they are not issues. Those two issues don't apply necessarily to. There'll be other issues, but those are the two that are being focused on most clearly.
Yeah, but can I just? You're right. Yeah, I've been following this story over the last few years, and it started out with a big focus, and rightly so, on the workers and the migrant workers, and then suddenly it switched to LGBTQ plus rights. Mm-hmm. That's just my observation.
Okay. And it's not mine, but I respect yours.
But I suspect that the reason we're not talking about workers' rights in quite the same way is because if you look at workers' rights around the world, in countries like the United States, Qatar is marginally worse.
I think it's much more than marginally worse.
If you compare it to the United States, if you look at international
death in the workplace.
Well, have you looked at? Do you know the stats?
No, I don't. I'm completely honest about that. I'd be surprised if they were comparable per capita.
Well, I would look at human rights. I'd look at workers' rights around the world and compare the United States.
So. Well, I wasn't. I was talking about deaths in the workplace. But I take your point. They both stand. They don't cancel each other out. So let me nudge you to this question, which is at the heart of my confusion. Who is allowed to criticise Qatar?
I think I have massive respect for Peter Tatchell going out because I know that he consistently, this is an issue that he consistently campaigns for, and he went out to Qatar to risk life and limb. I'm willing to respect because it's quite clear. But when it comes to, as you said, lazy Daily Mail columnists...
let's use Ian Hislop then, because that makes it all a little bit different. Ian Hislop, who is a genuine, I believe, paragon of virtue, both professionally and personally. I think he's one of the absolute best.
Does he watch the Premiership?
No, he doesn't. But he doesn't. He's got no interest at all in football.
Has he ever been? Would somebody of his ilk go to watch, say, a football match at the Emirates Stadium?
This isn't the zinger you think it is. Unfortunately for you, because he absolutely doesn't. He's quite famous for not knowing one end of a football from the other. But if he happens to really like cricket, would he watch cricket in a stadium that had been built with Qatari money? Then you might have a point to make. But does that undermine all criticism of people going to Qatar? Because the pink washing that goes on, the idea that by hosting a tournament they are somehow legitimised, is that morally different from, for example, the Shard being built with 2 billion quid's worth of Qatari cash, and Boris Johnson being there for the opening, and Prince Andrew abseiling down a section of it for charity? Is it different?
I think it's all. It depends on the degree to which you feel you're complicit. You can't, and this is very difficult to get. We can to be sort of mathematical about this, to come up with an equation. Or
to be binary and to say, it's all or nothing. And I am perhaps in danger of doing that. And I'm not excusing it. I'm not saying that it's okay, but I am saying if you're really going to give a kicking to these people, you need to explain why you have been silent in the past about this, and this. And I would include Ian Hislop on that list, actually, who is pretty much beyond reproach, but who gave Gary Neville a right old going over for essentially doing business with a broadcaster in Qatar that comes from the same source as about £40 billion worth of British assets, including stakes in Barclays Bank, Sainsbury's, Heathrow and British Airways. Will's in Oxford. Will, what do you think?
I think, first of all, first-time caller's a bit nervous, but so I think that basically we get into, if we don't sort of use platform, which commentators, players and people like David Beckham have to criticise the nature of Qatar, then I feel like we're missing a big opportunity to possibly make some slight little changes in the whole thing, because I think Qatar really have no sort of excuse for how they act and how they sort of because they had money is there for them not to have slaves, and I don't think there's any reason to be as homophobic as they are.
But it is. I mean, people are saying that though. But the accusation is that they shouldn't go. They shouldn't be there.
Well, I think that can make a powerful statement, though. If you sort of say,
it can. But I mean, BBC Two is probably going to screen some games. Or BBC One, rather, is going to screen some games. Ian Hislop appears on BBC One. Where is this line? Is it simply the people who go there are doing something worse than the people who shop in Sainsbury's, for example?
I think if they go there and just simply tug along the line, sort of go there and just say nothing about it and just sort of be like it's all normal, I think that can create some issues. If a younger viewer to watch it, they'll be like, oh, Qatar seems quite cool.
Whereas I think the Danish sponsor has removed itself from shirts. Questions are going to be asked. Conversations are going to be had.
Exactly.
I mean, you ask a footballer not to play football, but a journalist is free to do journalism in a newspaper that's owned by the same outfit that boasts about opening the first events business in Qatar.
Yeah, I'd say that's wrong. I say that's just a bit of, I'd say that's wrong. Like, you can't play on two sides, And obviously Gary Lineker has said stuff, spoken out about
Yes, he has.
I don't think Gary Lineker deserves too much criticism, but I think people like David Beckham definitely.
There's a difference between taking 10 million quid to be an ambassador for the tournament, because it's very hard to see how that doesn't somehow involve some form of being an ambassador for the country, and it's very hard to see how that doesn't somehow involve being an ambassador for the regime. And I think perhaps Beckham has bigger questions to answer than others. Gary Neville is going to be working for the Qatari state broadcaster while he's out there, among, I think, other commitments. So that puts him on a slightly different footing, I would argue, from Gary Lineker. But this clamour to condemn all of them as some form of sort of, oh, look at all the Liberals, aren't they hypocrites? I don't get it, because, well, as I've said, I mean, the list is almost endless. I've already mentioned Barclays Bank, Sainsbury's, Heathrow, British Airways, the Shard. The Al Thani ruling family holds more than 4,000 land titles in the United Kingdom, not just in London, spread throughout Britain. They range from luxury mansions and hotels to obscure industrial estates and even terraced houses. The Emirates property development business is behind multi-billion-pound urban developments in Glasgow, Manchester and Leeds. It's behind the Chelsea Barracks, the US Embassy and the Elephant and Castle developments and Grosvenor Waterside in London alone. You'll know that there's a particular quarter of London in Mayfair I was there yesterday, known as Little Doha, the Ritz, Claridge's, the Savoy, the Connaught, the Berkeley, the Churchill, Grosvenor House Suites and the Intercontinental Park Lane. All of these 5-star prestige London hotels are wholly or partly Qatari owned. Harrods in 2010, Valentino, Balmain, Pals Ileri, other salubrious London outlets, all owned by Qatar. Qatari royals own dozens of multi-million-pound mansions across London, none more than Forbes House, owned by the former Prime Minister, Hamad bin Jassim, who's the fellow that gave €3 million in Fortnum and Mason carrier bags to the current king. Planned renovations there are expected to turn the property into London's first £300 million home. But why have so many Liberals mislaid their morals over Qatar? Listen, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm being a bit loyal to Lineker in particular, because I'm a great admirer of his, but I'm not hearing it. I don't get it. If he was going there, Beckham, yeah, all right, don't take 10 million quid essentially from the ruling family when the laws that they have put in place are profoundly homophobic. But going there to play football or to commentate on the football, really? 11:33 is the time. Dominic Ellis has the headlines. It is 11:37 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Twitter is in absolute meltdown. Hashtag Twitter takeover, hashtag Twitter migration. Democrats in America calling for Elon Musk to be investigated. People resigning in their droves, subscribers or users of the social media platform, abandoning it and announcing that they're abandoning it on Twitter. Some astonishing exchanges. Truly astonishing exchanges involving Elon Musk himself, the billionaire, the richest man in the world, who paid 44 billion quid for it just a couple of weeks ago, including one which you just don't know what's real and what isn't anymore. Well, you know that some accounts have been closed because they were taking the mickey out of him, and they've changed some of the rules surrounding identification. They're about to get rid of the blue ticks unless you pay for the privilege of having one. But I mean, look, here you go. So here's Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, a prominent Democrat politician in America, saying, "Shout out to all the workers at Twitter. You all built a vital place for connection and you deserve so much better. Millions of people appreciate the space you built and the hard work that went into it. Thank you." That's valedictory, right? That's a farewell to Twitter, to which Elon Musk replies, "You're welcome." There's another one I saw where someone said that they had resigned and then they've been asked back in again. Here you go. So I don't know if this is real or not, but it's all blue tick these days, so it doesn't. I was laid off from Twitter this afternoon. I was in charge of managing badge access to Twitter offices. Elon just called me and asked if I could come back to help them regain access to HQ as they shut off all badges and accidentally locked themselves out. Now, if that's a Mickey take, if that's a parody, I don't get the joke really. But Elon Musk himself replied to say, "Thanks for helping out, you're a lifesaver." And that doesn't make it any clearer at all whether it's all a joke or not. So we'll talk about it from 12. But I've got to level with you. I don't really understand what's happening. Lots of people have been fired. Lots of people have resigned. Lots of people have left. I mean, my experience hasn't changed much. So, uptick in bots, but that was probably because of the American midterms, wherever all of these I'm a racist bunch of numbers accounts come from. There's always more of them whenever there's a political event unfolding, especially if there's a far-right candidate, and some of the Trump acolytes very, very easily fit into that category. What is going on? So many people are sending out their Mastodon handles. Sounds uncomfortable. Lots of people asking me, well, I'm not on any other platform, so there's almost certainly somebody pretending to be me on Mastodon. There's always accounts sort of claiming to be people, vaguely public profile. There'll be someone pretending to be you, either for comic reasons or unpleasant reasons or whatever. So just so you know, I'm not on any other platform, not on Mastodon, but I might join. I don't know. Who knows? Anyway, all that from 12. Back to the football. Football and Twitter, eh? Twitter and football. Crikey. So it's like my weekends. Dan's in Tunbridge Wells. Dan, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. I just wanted to sort of bring up the point you were making about footballers compared to maybe the commentators. And
yes.
I think Neville and Lineker, you could maybe distinguish slightly from the norm as well, because they probably put themselves more in the public eye politically than others.
But that just means that the political stances they take, which could be loosely described as humanitarian and therefore anti-Tory, that's the only reason why Tory newspapers and Tory figures are attacking them.
I completely agree with you on the sort of comparison of that callousness you sort of said in the initial introduction about comparing that to some of the racists and the people that want to do the deportations of Swallow Braverman and saying, oh yeah, but as soon as it suits the Liberals to go and do something, they're just as big they're just hypocrites anyway. So
yes,
you might as well
and people will lap that up, of course. People will lap
exactly.
that up.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I do think that also Neville and Lineker could potentially be split as well, which is why I'd probably disagree with you slightly on your response to Ian Hislop's criticism of Neville.
This is because Neville is going to be working for the Qatari state broadcast.
Well, and he did push himself out completely freelance into the Labour, publicly became a member of the Labour Party. He's not doing this on part of his Sky contract, so Lineker sort of has always kept his political beliefs just to Twitter, and he's always fulfilled complete impartiality with the BBC, and he's just going to be out in Qatar with the BBC, whereas Neville's gone, no, I believe in this, but, actually, if I can get a chance to get paid and go and enjoy the football, I'm going to do that as well.
Yeah.
So that I think that was sort of Ian Hislop's point, was sort of you can't have your cake and eat it. You either take a stance or you sort of stay a bit quiet about it.
I mean, I don't know that I agree with that. I mean, listen, I think that there is an argument for not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. But equally, if he is going to say things about the Qatari regime, even as he takes their money, it doesn't destroy. Possibly it dilutes some of what he says, but not even necessarily, does it?
Not necessarily. Well, I think it'll be interesting. I don't know if it will be televised over here, or if you'll be able to see any clips of what he says whilst broadcasting for them.
True.
But I think that could be quite interesting. But no, I do think you're right that it shouldn't destroy what he has been saying, because I agree with a lot of what he said. He's spoken pretty well generally about football in general, about ownership.
The line from Hislop, you don't have to take the Qataris' money, is a distinction, isn't it? So Beckham,
I think so. Yeah,
Beckham's not even getting it for commentating; he's just getting it for turning up and looking pretty.
Yeah, well, I think he's probably the most egregious of the bunch, but then he's never pretended to be sort of a politically engaged person. But I mean, with all his money and status, I don't think it was a particularly good.
But again, football commentary is how Gary Neville earns his living.
It is.
So to speak. I mean, he doesn't need the money, does he?
Very good living before that, and owns hotels and other things. He's not short of a few quid.
No, I think you're right. I don't think there's going to be a 100% answer to this. It's certainly not black and white. And what worries me is that some people are seeking to portray it as black and white. But yes, we're back to that triple distinction. Beckham, very hard to defend. Neville, quite hard to defend. Gary Lineker, I think, quite easy to defend. He works for the BBC. And the line that Ian Hislop used, of course, was, you don't have to take the Qatari money. But Prince Charles does. So why are you going after Gary Neville? Prince Charles took 3 million quid. It was for his charity, but so what? It's 3 million quid's worth of cash in a Fortnum and Mason carrier bag. To be fair to Ian Hislop, I'm certain he would criticise Prince Charles for doing it. He was Prince Charles then when he took the money. I know he's King Charles now. Hislop categorically would criticise anyone, no fear or favour from him. He's my favourite journalist, if you really want to know the truth. One of my favourite journalists ever. Certainly the favourite journalist working in the UK at the moment. And he has no fear or favour. But for everybody else who's queuing up to have a swing, like the Daily Mail, obviously ridiculous to go after Gary Lineker when they've got a flipping office in Doha running events. But, well, anyway, it's an interesting conversation. And it will continue to be after this. It is 11:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a funny one, isn't it? I suppose in a way I've sort of been hoisted by my own petard in criticising people for being very, very black and white on an issue that is actually not very black and white. So there isn't a clear conclusion to draw from who should and who shouldn't be condemned or criticised for going to Qatar or taking Qatari money, which only applies to Beckham and Neville in the sort of holy trinity of footballers that we've been discussing. So why the Daily Mail have chosen a picture of Gary Lineker to illustrate their story, why have so many liberals mislaid their morals over Qatar, without, of course, mentioning that the Daily Mail and General Trust runs a company called DMG Events that was boasting in 2017 about being the first events company to establish itself in Qatar. You've got to clip that up and put it out. They'll love that. 11:49 is the time. Back to Natalie, who's in Taunton. What do you think, Natalie?
Hello. I just wanted to say that I think it's important when people have an opportunity to do what they can. I mean, we all do and some of us can do more than others. So, for instance, I can't afford an electric car, but I can reduce the amount of fuel I use. If I choose to take the tube to work instead of a private car, no one's going to know. But when you do it and you talk about it on the radio, then people will talk about it and they'll say, oh, well, James O'Brien's doing that. Maybe that's something I should do too. And I just think there are people who are in the public eye in this example who can make a difference. So I can't burn £10,000 or shred £10,000, but Joe Lycett obviously can. So he's taken that opportunity to make that statement.
Yes.
I was very happy back in the day of Moscow Olympics when they didn't play the national anthem, because that was something that they could do. And I just think that this is an opportunity for people like Gary Lineker or Gary Neville or Harry Kane or the whole England football team could do in Iran. I think I'm right in saying that Omar Jalili said that the Iranian team don't celebrate a goal or something like that.
Yeah.
And so wouldn't that send the most incredible message? Because they'd still be there, they'd still be playing, and they might even still win. But making a statement like that to make people, well, why aren't they running around? Why aren't they hugging each other? Well, actually, ... And it does raise awareness, and it does make people think, and it does make people question. And I do think this is an opportunity for that.
I think you're brilliant. And we've allowed ourselves to be conditioned into thinking that if you don't do everything, then you're a hypocrite. If you don't wear sackcloth and ashes and self-flagellate yourself on national television every morning in protest at something happening on the other side of the world, then you're not allowed to criticise it at all.
It just becomes whataboutery, and that just becomes meaningless, and that doesn't help anyone. And it stops people like me from wanting to think about using less petrol or not, saving up for an electric car, because I just think, well, what's the point?
That's a beautiful example, because I always think of JK when this discussion is being had, although I've not heard the point made as powerfully as you've just made it ever, I don't think. But JK, you remember JK from Jamiroquai?
I do, yeah.
The Cat in the Hat. He was he was one of the first people to start talking about environmentalism very publicly, along with the now King Charles. And it was often pointed out to him that he was a collector of supercars. He had loads of really high. Do you know what he always used to say?
Yeah.
He always used to say, only drive them one at a time. And I kind of thought he had a point, actually. But it is an attempt to say no one is ever allowed to criticise the status quo because everybody lives in it in some way, shape or form.
We can only do what we're capable of doing.
But there are distinctions, aren't there? So 10 million quid for David Beckham to be an ambassador for Qatar while also being a gay icon. I think Elton John is godfather to his kids. That's a tough one to swallow.
Yeah, I mean, he has got an incredible opportunity today, David Beckham.
Yes.
Because he could, all right, Joe, you're on. I will do what you want me to do. And then that would be, he can make use of his platform. We don't know what the England team are going to do. We don't know what Gary Lineker's going to say. We don't know what Gary Neville's going to say. So
we should wait and see. I know that the BBC have consulted Amnesty International to make sure that they get their facts right and strike the right tone. We know that Harry Kane is going to wear an armband demonstrating support for LGBTQ+, which is a hell of a lot more than the average Daily Mail columnist ever does. So, this idea that if you do anything, it's worthless because you're not doing everything is pathetic, actually. It's quite fascistic. It's a way to undermine all criticism and all speaking of truth to power.
Exactly, and it just makes people like Joe Public completely feel powerless. Well, what's the point? I might as well go out, and do whatever I like about anything, because unless I become a vegan, there's no point me giving up red meat.
There it is. And it lets people who somewhere deep down know they're in the wrong to say things like, well, it just proves that all the anti-racists are as bad as the actual racists. All the liberals are as bad as the actual fascists. And that has been quite a popular position in far-right politics in recent years. Natalie, I'm putting you straight to the top of the class.
Thank you very much.
No, it's all downhill from here. But that is an absolutely brilliant contribution. I certainly can't improve on. Thank you, Natalie. Tony's in Dublin. Tony, what would you like to say?
How are you, James? Are you well?
I'm grand, thank you.
Excellent news. You steal someone's thunder yourself, and Natalie just made my point that I was going to make.
Okay.
But I think the psychodrama, I suppose, of the right-wing media on this tone is to project the idea that you people are secretly as bad as we are. That's pretty much the central theme.
It is. It really is.
Yeah. It's the easiest thing to do. If you're not 100% pure, therefore my massive impurity almost doesn't count. I can salve my soul.
It's a popular tactic for the extremities. isn't it? Because it's not a left or right thing, this. It happens on both sides. The idea of if you're not ideologically pure enough, you're not joining our team, and you can't see the light, and you're part of the problem. And you know, we saw it a bit in the Labour Party in recent years, when everyone was a Tory who didn't fully buy into a sort of personality cult. And then the right equivalent is if you're not living in a box to prove how much you disapprove of inequality, then you're not allowed to criticise capitalism or anybody or any distribution of wealth whatsoever.
Yeah, I think your most straightforward recent analogy, maybe you would have experienced over there, is I know I had 15 parties, but you had a curry. Therefore.
So, yes, you're absolutely right, aren't you?
Yeah.
And two weeks' worth of front pages in the same newspaper pretending that Keir Starmer was as bad as Boris Johnson because his supporters were desperate to believe it. Because the alternative would be to acknowledge that you're talking to that you're supporting a wrong one.
It also, absolutely, but it also achieves maybe a second goal in that if I can allow the general public or something like that off the hook morally, I can say, look, you don't need to feel bad about watching this World Cup because Lineker and Neville are the same as you, so you can come out from behind your settee and actually watch it straight on the television. So there is hypocrisy to go around, but I think the media angle from the right wing is exactly like we were saying, to just portray everybody as the same, therefore we're fine. But I think there is enough hypocrisy to go around, Jay.
Well, I think you're right. I'll tell you what, I wonder whether Tommy Smith and John Carlos would have made such an impact if they decided to boycott the medal ceremony or the whole of the Olympics in Mexico City in 1968 instead of raising a black-gloved fist during the playing of the national anthem, eh?
True, absolutely. It carries a lot of weight.
Thank you, Tony. Really good stuff, this. I've enjoyed this conversation a lot. And it does, in a sense, boil down to absolutism or indeed letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. But it doesn't let everybody off the hook. They're just that the hooks are of varying sizes. And the biggest hook of all is probably the Daily Mails, because they're the one that boast about, or at least their parent company, also owns a company that boasts about being the first events company to establish itself in Qatar. Establishing a presence is an important strategic move for us, said Matt Denton, president of DMG Events, Middle East, Asia and Africa. It brings with it access to a market of significant potential. It remains an outrage that the tournament is held in Qatar, an outrage that should horrify all civilised people, says the Daily Mail columnist Jan Moyer today. Nice work if you can get it. That's not even the worst column in the right-wing media today. The worst one is calling all British workers lazy. And that's in the Telegraph. Stephen's in Manchester. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. So I think I'm definitely probably going to come second in the class or lower after Natalie's great contribution. But
good man.
For me, I take a step back and I look at it on the parallel of climate change.
Yes.
You know, the football in Qatar was put there by big institutions, and just like us as individuals, we can recycle, but we can't fundamentally change what's going to happen to the climate. And it's the upper echelons of larger organisations that need to, where the change needs to happen, but we contribute in our own small way. So for me, David Beckham being paid directly or indirectly to present the Qatari state as something that it shouldn't be portrayed at is quite naughty.
Right.
Gary Neville and Mr. Lineker are broadcasters, and they don't set the terms of where they
Neville does
need to go to broadcast.
Neville does on this one. He could have gone there on the payroll of ITV or Sky or you know, but he's decided instead to take the Qatari shilling, as you would say if you were writing a newspaper column. So he has slightly different, or possibly very different questions to answer from the ones that Gary Lineker has to answer.
True, and again, I think, you know, I'd put Gary Lineker in a better place than Neville.
Yes.
But then, if I draw a parallel to, and look, I think you'd appreciate this from media organisations. Who owns the media organisation right at the top of the tree? And within that organisation can often be sub-brands and individuals who take quite a contrary position to maybe the positions of the ultimate paymasters at the top of that stack. And I hear you chuckling because I think you hear the point that I'm making here. So,
are you referring to some of my erstwhile colleagues?
Well, you know better than I, sir.
Well, there were people who accused me of hypocrisy for not resigning when we had some particularly toxic individuals on the payroll. I always took the view that if I'm allowed to sit here and call them toxic, then I'm going nowhere. Thank you very much indeed. But this applies even more, of course, to the Mail. This amazing line here. What kind of message must that send to the oppressed people of Qatar? Precisely this one, that their suffering does not matter and that some years of hurt are more important than others. And then back to Daily Mail events company that opened in Doha in 2017. Establishing a presence in Qatar is an important strategic move for us. Well, hang on, what message does that send to the oppressed people of Qatar? Funny that, isn't it? 12 noon is the time. From football to Twitter. This is incredible. All I need now is a beer, and that's 3 of my favourite things in the world. It is 4 minutes after 12, and whether you're on it or not, the whole world is currently talking about Twitter. The first thing we should do is probably work out why. Loads of people are abandoning it. Is that because they object to Elon Musk's management techniques? The ultimatum of agreeing to work more intense. I'm 50 years old, and if you ever catch me saying the word hardcore with a straight face, I'm allowed to do it ironically. Hardcore, you know the score. Take me out, shoot me. Seriously, it's pathetic. There are something. Listen, the world changes, right? I find it almost impossible to imagine my late father as a child, and yet Brian Cox, the actor, is of a similar generation. He's a bit younger than my dad, and he is someone who wears his child very, very close to the surface. The 8-year-old Brian is who he still... I interviewed him this week. I forgot to tell you. He was on with Andrew Marr last night. We found out he was coming to do it, and Andrew's team very kindly allowed us to importune Brian Cox and get him onto the show. Turns out it was Zainal, actually, who gets a big thank you for that. It turns out Brian Cox is actually a fan of the show, which was a wonderful thing to discover, a truly wonderful thing to discover. But he didn't need much persuading to do the Full Disclosure podcast, which will be with you soon. And we talk a lot. In fact, one of the themes that pops up a lot in Full Disclosure is the relationship between the child and the adult. I don't know whether it's a result of me doing therapy and finding out how important it is in many ways, because it comes very naturally to some people. And Brian's current project on Channel 5, How the Other Half Lives, sees him go back to the Dundee tenement where he grew up in relative poverty after his dad died when he was 8 years old and his mum had long battles with mental health. And breakdowns and various other conditions. He was essentially raised by his older sister, and that child is still who he thinks of himself as. Isn't that amazing? I think we all have an age, but then some kids are 40. You know, aren't they? See them on the bus in the mornings, the briefcase boys. Some kids are 40, even though they're 14, and then some 40-year-olds are still 14. The lunch we had yesterday, I think it's fair to say that everybody around the table, when Steve Allen and I were very kindly treated to lunch by far the finest broadcaster of his generation, everyone around the table was essentially sort of a giggling schoolboy. It's just such why we had such a lovely time. Reminded to tell you who was at the next table before I go home, if you weren't listening to Steve this morning. And that, I just mentioned that because the inner child is absolutely fascinating to me. But there are times where you should really have abandoned certain practices or certain turns of phrase or certain habits and hobbies. And I think for a man in his 50s to be talking about being hardcore is just pathetic. And now you're going to find a clip of me doing it, aren't you? Or something like that. Hardcore, you know the score. Why am I talking about that? Because we're talking about Elon Musk. And this utterly bizarre saga over at Twitter. I mean, everybody is outraged by what Elon Musk has done, telling people if they don't want to work here at a much higher level than they currently work, then they can leave with three months severance pay. There are warnings that Twitter could be knocked offline because so many people have walked out. In the past 24 hours, hundreds of company staff have rejected Elon Musk's ultimatum. These are the ones who still had jobs after he got rid of loads of people. They don't want to work more intensely in order to keep their jobs. One expert has said it's unlikely the site would go down in the next few days, but he has warned it's under increased strain as key engineers whose job it is to maintain the site start leaving. And the World Cup would be quite a major event for Twitter. You'd expect to see traffic go up. So half of the company's 7,500 workers have been fired, as well as a number of additional contractors. Hundreds more are now reported to have left after rejecting this ultimatum from the billionaire, telling them that they'd have to stay at the company to build a new hardcore Twitter. And it's already at greater risk of falling offline because of the initial job cuts. And then you come to Twitter itself, where everyone is leaving and opening up accounts elsewhere and moving along to other platforms. People grumbling that Mastodon, which seems to be one of the most popular destinations, is currently very, very slow. But if you've got 1 million people turning up unexpectedly, then everything's going to be slow. One person on Twitter, who I quite like, points out that it's like 1 million people turning up in a tiny rural village and complaining that there's a queue to get into the only tea room, which is run by Babs and Maureen as a retirement hobby and is only open on Mondays to Wednesdays. That's the rather brilliant Richard Littler making that point. So, what's going on? 03456060973. Who knows? And that's the other problem. Why are people leaving? Are they leaving in protest? Or are they just getting ready for the possible collapse of Twitter? I mean, imagine if everyone here walked out and I was still here. You wouldn't be able to hear me. I haven't got a clue what to do. It would be hilarious if Keith didn't turn up for work. I just had to, right, what do I press? Shall I just press some buttons now in the studio, see what happens? Would that be fun? Would we enjoy that? Okay. But none of them work in here. Not even... This one works, right? That one, no? No, so that one works. Shall I dump a bit? Shall I dump something? What would happen if I press dump now? We wouldn't hear the punchline. So if I press dump now, you wouldn't hear me saying what would happen if I press dump now. How long is the delay? 10 seconds. So I have to say, what would happen if I press the dump button now, and then wait 10 seconds, and then press the dump button, and then I'd start talking straight away after I said, is that what would happen? Should we try it? Am I allowed to do this? I'm not going to get into any trouble? Okay, so I press the button and then I wait 10 seconds and you won't hear any of the 10-second pause. You'll just hear me. It would be like nothing. It'd be like there was no pause. Is that right? Well, I can just do it without pressing the dump button, can't I? I can pretend I've pressed it. I can say, right, I'm about to press the dump button and then I will pause for 10 seconds, but you won't. No, I'll pause for 10 seconds, then I'll press the dump button, but you won't hear the pause because the dump button will rewind the program by the 10-second delay that is built in to avoid swearing and things like that. There'd still be 5 seconds of silence. Why? What? Oh, so it's 5 seconds. So I need to pause. I pause for 5 seconds, and then press the dump button, and you won't hear any pause at all. Okay, but I can fake that anyway, just because I'm frightened of the buttons. So I could just do this. Okay, I'm going to pause for 5 seconds, and then I'm going to press the dump button. All right, and you won't hear any pause at all. And we're back in the room. You didn't... I know you did hear a pause, but I got that wrong. Hang on, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to pause for 5 seconds, and I'm going to... Listen, all I'm trying to prove to you is that if Keith wasn't here, I would not be able to broadcast, okay? And I think I've proved that even more conclusively than I could have hoped in my wildest dreams. Okay, I'm going to do it right this time. Okay, so I'm going to pause for 5 seconds and then press the dump button, but you won't know because what the dump button does is rewind us 5 seconds. Okay, I'm about to pause for 5 seconds and we're back in the room. How about that? That was incredible. Oh my God, boom, boom, boom. I suppose we need to do a phone in as well, don't we? Is Twitter going to collapse? Is everybody leaving? What are people cross about? I don't know, really. Give me a call and tell me. 0345 6060973. What's going on? Why has everyone got so cross? Any imminent blackout is unlikely because certain locks prevent changes to the platform's base code. There's a brilliant article in the New Statesman. I don't know if you've read it, by a pal of mine, actually. Can we get him on? Can we get James on? Can you give James a ring, see if he'll come on? The New Statesman, James Ball. The guy who wrote the article I showed you earlier. He's got some very interesting things to say. Dan in Chester says, this is top tier content, James. This is what we tune in for. Brendan says, this is absolutely fascinating. And Steve says, I've just tuned in, WTF. Yeah. I was just demonstrating what would happen here if I was on my own, trying to keep the show afloat, trying to keep the show alive. And Keith wasn't there doing whatever it is he does in the other room, pressing all the buttons and twiddling all the dials. And that is what might be happening at Twitter. So albeit that it's still up for now, if enough people leave, it could all fall apart. And that would seem to me to be what everyone is worried about. But why is everybody leaving the actual platform as opposed to the company? Is it in protest? Why have you left? Is it in protest at Elon Musk and what he's doing, the terrible way that he's behaving? Or is it simply in preparation for the possible collapse of the entire platform? 13 minutes after 12 is the time. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. And Dave has just been in touch to say all that James is currently proving on LBC with his dump button is that Keith deserves a pay rise, as James is obviously clueless. This oddly enough, as a conversation that we were having earlier. It's not up to me. It's well beyond my pay grade. What's going on at Twitter? Forget about this studio. I think we've proved fairly conclusively that we'd be absolutely up a creek without a paddle if I was left in charge of anything remotely technological, and that is probably what might happen at Twitter. So although there will still be people there, the service you receive will be unrecognisable because there will simply not be enough people to do what is needed. To which I'd ask, why can't he just hire new people? Or why can't he just sort of come to a slightly better arrangement with the staff that he's currently got? Is he actually going to destroy the entire platform? Is he, as some people have suggested, Elon Musk? Is this like the most astonishing disaster? Some people think if it is, it might be deliberate. Why would a billionaire buy something that allows ordinary people to achieve astonishing amplification for their opinions and criticisms unless he wanted to close it down? I don't buy into that yet. I may do if you persuade me, but I don't at the moment buy that at all. And the final point being that if you'd paid £44 billion for LBC, there's no earthly way you'd let them take you off air. That's a very good point. If you pay £44 billion for Twitter, the idea that Elon Musk would be actually committed to the idea of closing it down or ruining it deliberately seems to me to be pie in the sky. But of course, the notion that he might be doing so accidentally is more than plausible, certainly going by current performance. So we're just going to talk about Twitter. I probably should have said that at the start. It's 12:18. What is going on? Listen, I hope everything's all right. I love Twitter, but I don't understand what is happening. Hopefully someone listening does. Andy's in Hull to kick things off. Andy, no pressure.
Well, I rang you a while back, basically saying TLDR it's finished.
Yes.
And it seems my prediction is going, pretty much how I thought.
Really?
Yes. It's a bit like the B word, which I won't mention because I don't want you to put another tenner in the 10.
No.
But there are so many different factors, as you've gone through with some of your listeners. I mean, the first is you've got the Ratner's effect.
Right.
Whereby the brand is so damaged.
Well, why is it so damaged? Because, I mean, listen, I'm on it a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't feel it is damaged. Okay, now that is possibly because I don't understand fully what's going on, and maybe because I've not been paying attention, but my experience is not massively diminished. I'm worried about what happens when everyone gets a blue tick for paying $8, and if you don't pay $8, you lose your blue tick, but only for very selfish reasons, because I quite enjoy having the extra feed that's confined to fellow blue tick accounts, and if everyone's got one, then the ability to find famous people on there is hugely diminished. But why is the brand damaged? It's still working pretty much as it worked before.
Well, when you consider for advertisers' perspective,
yeah,
that is one aspect where they don't know whether they're going to find their brand completely damaged, like Eli Lilly. You've also got the other aspect.
This, for people who don't know, someone set up an account claiming to be a big pharmaceutical company. It looked real, didn't it, because of the nature of Twitter and the failure of the blue tick system, and they announced that insulin was going to be free henceforward, and their share price went off a cliff in real life. So
I think it was a couple of billion, wasn't it, that was wiped off?
So advertisers also now run a greater risk of having their brand alongside something really vile on there, because if there are fewer moderators, then it's going to be harder to get rid of the really vile stuff. So you think that has damaged the brand, but surely not irreversibly.
Well, this is where how he's running it is basically running it into the ground. As you said, the moderator aspect. When you consider some reports are saying there's about 12% of the staff left after his threat you've got to click this link by this day, otherwise you lose your job.
Yeah.
Imagine your entire building you're in only having 12% of the staff. How screwed would it be?
Well, I just showed you, didn't I?
Yeah.
And that was just one person going.
Yeah. So
but there is an argument for it being overstaffed. I mean, it was losing money. He had to cut some of the payouts, didn't he?
But this, imagine something big like the NHS, for example, cutting to 12% of the staff.
So what am I looking out for?
You're looking out for also things like confidence. So if
in terms of so something that might happen in the next few days that adds to your thesis.
So for that, it would be the availability. So So as Musk showed his, it's like, oh, Twitter's getting all these people.
Yeah.
And people are replying back with, well, actually, your spike's going up for all people who can't access it.
Right.
And for big companies like Google, for example, they have massive teams that make sure it is always there. Same with Facebook.
Sure.
Because as soon as it goes down, they lose millions or billions because nobody can get on there. Nobody can go. The advertisers don't pay their money because they can't do anything. And then you get all people going, well,
so that's what I'm looking for then. And when do you think that might be that things might start to wobble? So this would mean I go onto Twitter and I can't get on.
I would say, the next few days, especially if there's any code changes or anything else trying to rush out.
Right.
Because if you've got 12% of the staff trying to do it, you're not going to get all the people checking it. You're not going to get anything going and getting lined up properly. All the people who probably knew all those systems have been fired.
And that is going to be very interesting. And he says not, but he carries this sort of messianic status around, doesn't he? We'll talk more about this with other callers, I think. But no one's perfect. He could make a huge mistake. That seems to be the thing that a lot of his admirers can't factor in. Andy's persuaded already that he is. And to be fair to Andy, he told me when we talked about this a week ago that was probably going to happen. I think that events have supported his theory since then, but it's not over yet. And then you have this weird perspective. And again, I'm looking at Elon Musk's own Twitter for this. So you have, I'll read you something he's replied to. The far left is desperately praying for Twitter to be a disaster, spinning stories about how the sky is burning. But the truth is everyone on Twitter is having fun, including them. I'm just not part of any gang on this at all. I don't understand much about what's going on, but it's certainly not going well. But Elon Musk is claiming in response to that tweet, claiming the far left is desperately paying for Twitter to be a disaster. He replies saying record numbers of users are logging in to see if Twitter is dead, ironically making it more alive than ever. I suppose I'm paying more attention to Twitter today, even more than I usually do, because of what Elon Musk has just tongue-in-cheekly suggested. Here's something from the New York Times. Mr. Musk's team also held meetings with undecided employees who are key to Twitter operations to try to persuade them to stay. They've got 3 sources supporting this. In one of those meetings, some employees were summoned to a conference room in the San Francisco office, while others called in via video conference. As the 5 p.m. deadline passed, some who had called in began hanging up, seemingly having decided to leave, even as Mr. Musk continued speaking. 2 people familiar with the meeting said. So if people who are absolutely intrinsic to keeping it up and running are leaving, then it will cease to be up and running, perhaps. Are you still with me at the back? Dan's in Bristol. Dan, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. How are you doing?
Very well, mate.
So I'm a software engineer. I work for quite a well-known software company that everyone will know and use.
Yes.
There's a sense these days in the tech community, especially with new and recently graduated engineers or those that are early in their career, that they don't want to work all the hours God sends. They want to have flexibility. They want to work where they choose to, whether it be that at home, in the office, or in a cafe or something like that. And they don't want to be dictated to by managers or even business owners like Musk, who have no idea how people work these days.
But he must do. He's Elon Musk. He's like a pioneer of modernity.
He doesn't care.
Is that right?
He's one lab accident away from being a Bond villain, in my opinion.
Yeah, okay.
So, that kind of ilk of person. He wholly doesn't understand how new and young people work. He's about my age. I'm old when it comes to software engineering. I really am.
Yeah, I'm sure. I believe you. You don't have to persuade me.
I'm a tad younger than you, not much.
Yeah. All right. That's sort of carried away.
And I feel old when I go to the office every day.
Yeah.
And all the young folks I work with, all the recent graduates, they're really enthusiastic. They really want to learn. They really want to get on. They really want to be adding value and contributing to the workplaces. But what they don't want to be is told how long they should be working and how they should be working and the techniques that they use, and be bullied into their being in a job where they feel like they're, been their hand over fist. I'm sure a lot of the tech bros that are into Bitcoin and stuff like that will lap this up. They'll love
I don't understand that. I don't know what. I mean, this is people who think he's wonderful regardless of whatever he does. So he's part Liz Truss and part Boris Johnson then. Good God, the worst bits of both. Yeah. He's like oof. Although he would surely dispute that. Hopefully someone will ring in who's got a much more positive reading of the situation. But, there comes a point, you'll know about this, the critical teams, this is from The Verge, which is a brilliant, I find it a very, very good.
I read it regularly.
I bet you do. I've only relatively recently discovered it, but it's bang on the front line of technology journalism, isn't it? So multiple critical teams inside Twitter have now either completely or near completely resigned, said other employees who requested anonymity to speak without Musk's permission, because he's firing people for speaking. That includes Twitter's traffic and front-end teams that route engineering requests to the correct back-end services. The team that maintains Twitter's core system libraries that every engineer at the company uses is also gone. And here's an amazing quote. You cannot run Twitter without this team, a departing employee said.
I went to their offices about 5-6 years ago. A friend of mine worked there, and it was a lovely, lovely place to be.
Yeah.
I was allowed to
beanbags, a lot of beanbags. Am I right?
Not really.
Oh,
I've got a big picture of me in front of the Twitter bird. I'll tweet it to you later.
Oh yeah, nice.
The logo, and I had a lovely meal in there. There were lots of engaged people willing to talk to us and hang out and be present, and we were given a tour. And then we had a few beers, and it was a very nice place. There's no beanbags in my building. I choose to live in the southwest of England because it's where my family's from. It's where I want to be. My office is in North London. I can't get there every day. I almost fell asleep at the wheel driving back at Wednesday night when I drove home the other night. I just don't want to be in the office all the time. The reason why I go in is to engage with the people that I want to work with and that I work with every day, and build efficiency.
I hear you. And so he's misread the room on an almost unbelievable scale.
Yeah.
There it is. Dan, thank you, mate. This is. I'm getting a picture. I look forward to seeing your picture. I'm one of those new graduates, says Will, who Dan's just been talking about, in software engineering. I can completely agree. We're enthusiastic. We want to learn and advance, but we also want flexibility and remote working, and that increases our productivity rather than reducing it. And Elon Musk is 51. This from Sarah says he's a dinosaur in tech. He's outdated. The AOC, that's the Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez video takedown of him, is great. I haven't seen that yet. I didn't even know there was one, but I've seen that she's essentially gone on Twitter to say goodbye Twitter. So is Twitter dead? 03456060973. I hope not. And now I feel bad for hoping not. Because, if he hits up a couple of people texting me to say they've left because of the way he's treating his staff, is it that appalling to say you're going to have to work harder or you're free to leave? I don't know is the short answer. It's so long since I had anything that remotely resembles a normal job. If they said to me, you've got to do 4 hours a day or you're out, I'd probably do 4 hours a day, wouldn't I? Don't give them any ideas. Would I do 4 hours a day rather than leave? I don't know. But I maybe I'm misunderstanding the unpleasantness of the tactic that Musk has introduced. And it was hemorrhaging money. You can't get away from that. So it might have been a lovely place to work, but it was hemorrhaging money. Although James Ball's article in the New Statesman points out that it was only about a 10% uptick away from breaking even on the advertising spend. So if he'd gone in and focused on the right things, there's quite a strong argument for saying he could have made it financially viable without setting fire to the office, metaphorically speaking. Oh, what a fascinating business. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines. And there is a hemorrhaging of staff, and these are the ones that remained after he got rid of half of them. Just like that, after 12 years, I've left Twitter. I've nothing but love for all my fellow tweets, past and present. 1,000 faces and 1,000 scenes are now flashing through my mind right now. I love you, Twitter, and I'll forever bleed blue. That's a resignation from a senior member of staff. Loads of them going now. I'll retweet you the article from The Verge if you follow me on Twitter, if it's still running, at Mr. James O.B. I am now, we're only half an hour into the conversation, I am now feeling a sense of imminent demise, maybe wrongly, but this article in The Verge, you haven't read it. You can't be cynical about something you haven't read. It's making me think, and that is like an industry Bible. And here is a line that journalists, Theo Ushwood's in the room, so there's at least one proper journalist in the studio. Here's a fascinating line, mate. This is incredible. So it's a long article about Twitter.
Yes.
On a very reputable site.
Yes.
Quoting, incredibly well-placed sources, detailing departures, all about how critical teams are no longer in place, parts of the idea that the platform is going to start crumbling because the people are simply not there to keep it afloat. And the last line of the article is going to have a particular resonance for journalists. Twitter no longer has a communications department to contact for comment. Isn't that incredible?
No, yeah. Who do you mean?
I mean, you can tweet Elon Musk. He seems to be replying to people relatively randomly. I'm tempted to try. Do you think he'd come on the show?
You haven't tweeted him yet?
No. Shall I do it? Okay. No, I look like a right idiot. Won't I? Everyone will just laugh. Anyway, Theo's here, so there must be things afoot in the world of politics.
Can we talk about Brexit?
Yeah. What?
Brexit.
Keith, get the tin.
Is there a tin? No, because it wasn't mentioned once yesterday by Jeremy Hunt as he delivered his autumn statement. It wasn't mentioned either, as you pointed out, James, by Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, in her reply. But it did receive a number of mentions from the Office for Budget Responsibility in its report and forecast that came with the autumn statement. The OBR stating our exit from the EU, and I'm quoting here, had a significant adverse impact on trade as it's cut overall volumes of
Jeremy
trade.
Hunt refuses to accept that, doesn't he? Didn't he say, I refuse to accept the premise of Brexit as being bad for the economy? I mean, it's incredible.
So, but overall, in the long run, the OBR said that trade with the EU will be 15% lower than what it would have been had we decided to vote Remain in 2016. In the medium term, that's over the course, it's in the last financial quarter of next year, trade is down more than 8%. Rachel Reeves was therefore asked this morning whether Labour might rejoin the single market. Her reply, not going to happen.
So there are practical things that could be done to improve our trade and our competitiveness. Doesn't mean going back into the European Union or the single market or customs union. You know, that ship has sailed. We voted to leave the European Union, but we can make improvements on the deal that we've got today. And Labour would be determined to do that to help British businesses and British working people who at the moment are missing out on some of those opportunities.
That ship has sailed, which brings me on to the respected Institute for Fiscal Studies, because it held its customary post-fiscal event briefing this morning. I've been listening so that you don't have to. The highest tax burden since World War II is here to stay. It's going to be here, in fact, for the next 2 decades. That's how long we can expect taxes to remain at the current level. Middle England is going to take the biggest hit, according to the IFS and its director, Paul Johnson, who set out that we're all going to feel much, much poorer.
What we're really doing, of course, is reaping the costs of long-term failure to grow the economy, the effects of an ageing population, and high levels of past borrowing. After years of stagnation, household incomes are set to fall and then recover only gradually, while taxes rise and public services continue to struggle. What a combination. The truth is, of course, we just got a lot poorer. We're in for a long, hard, unpleasant journey, a journey that's been made more arduous than it might have been by a series of economic own goals. Mr. Hunt appears to have recognised this after years of cakeism. His colleagues and the opposition, and we the voters, are going to need to take that fact on board too.
Imagine mispronouncing Jeremy Hunt's name and not doing the thing.
Yes. A series of economic own goals. Now, the first question in the Q&A, and I was one of the journalists to ask it, what were those own goals?
Very clearly, Brexit was an economic own goal. There may be other reasons for Brexit, but economically speaking, that has been very bad news indeed, and continues to be bad news, particularly the way that we've done it, the hard type of Brexit that we've had, distancing ourselves from the single market.
Let's play it again. Theo asked this question, by the way. He's too modest to say so. So what were the own goals, economic guru?
Very clearly, Brexit was an economic own goal. There may be other reasons for Brexit, but economically speaking, that has been very bad news indeed, and continues to be bad news, particularly the way that we've done it, the hard type of Brexit.
I thought it was going to make us all richer.
Ourselves.
Well, not according to what Paul Johnson.
Well, there was going to be £350 million a week.
We
for the
spent
NHS.
that already. We spent that. Theresa May spent that £350 million.
But we must be much better off because we left the European Union. We must be really outperforming all of the other countries that are there on things like growth and wealth and job creation. We took back control, Theo.
No.
Oh,
James, not according to
do
the
you
IFS.
know who was at the next table to me at lunch yesterday?
No, who was the table?
I'm thinking about it. I mean, he didn't talk to me. I'm quite happy to be rude to people who interrupt me when I'm out socialising if they come from the toxic side of British politics, as has been rather well reported in recent weeks. So that he didn't. So we just. I got there.
Mm-hmm. Where was it, by the way?
So a very, very, very smart restaurant. So I wasn't paying. Steve Allen was also there as well. Right. And I arrive a little later than everybody else, and there is a giggle There's a sort of
People expect it
sniggering at the table, at which point they said, look, we've got you a present. And I said, what? And they just indicated to the next table along.
Who was sitting there?
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Wow. Did you say anything to him? Did you exchange eye contact with him?
Nope. I'm sure whether we both prefer it that way, but thinking about it, just some point someone's going to have to ask him about the...
all the benefits.
Yeah.
Cheaper.
Yeah. He said there'd be more money.
Yeah.
And amazingly enough, the night before, was it the night before or the night before? It was on Tuesday night. I was at an awards ceremony, the brilliant Magnitsky Awards, and guess who I was sat next to?
I think I know this one. Do I know this one?
Yeah.
Ian Duncan Smith.
Yeah.
Sir Ian Duncan Smith.
What a week. What an amazing week. Although I have to report that Ian Duncan Smith was absolutely charming and it was a very important event. And of course, Bill Browder, whose campaign for Magnitsky sanctions, I mentioned this in my own speech, he brings together anybody who can help. It's a really helpful reminder that some issues transcend party politics, in fact, human rights. Some of the bravest people. One of my mates, who I've become friends with as a consequence of being involved in the Magnitsky movement, his wife deputised for him because he's currently in jail in Moscow. And last year we were giggling together and guzzling grub at the table. These people really put their
Bill Browder's great.
lives. He is great. So there it is. I mean, when are people going to start talking about it, do you think?
Well, we're talking about
it. I know we are. We've never stopped. But when is everybody else at the BBC going to start? Even a month ago, I heard a presenter on the BBC say, we don't want to relitigate Brexit. That decision's been taken. So what are we going to do? Are we just going to ignore it? I don't know.
But, of course... Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer said he said on LBC it was a straight no when it comes to rejoining the European Union or even the single market, because of course you can rejoin the single market without joining the European Union itself. But from Labour aren't prepared to even countenance it because of course they're concerned that their voters who of course went blue in the Conservatives in 2019 won't come back if they suddenly say, well, everybody made a mistake who voted to leave the European Union back in 2016.
It's just going to have to happen at some point, isn't it? But when and where?
But at the moment, the government isn't prepared to countenance it, and Labour isn't prepared to, and they're the only two options for government.
And yet here we are counting the cost on an almost daily basis. Thank you, Theo. Was there anything else?
No.
You sure you don't want to get anything off your chest?
Everything okay? Everything's all well.
Ready for the weekend?
Yeah.
Doing anything nice?
No, don't think so. Just hang out in the park.
There you go. You going to ask what I'm doing?
What are you doing? Sorry,
I'm going to Belfast to film Celebrity Mastermind.
What's your specialist subject?
The books of J.D. Salinger.
The books of Catcher in the Rye?
Yeah. There's 4. Right. I'm beginning to regret my choice.
Why did you choose that?
Well,
why did you choose Brexit?
I thought I knew them inside out. Because Brexit, I mean, I'm good.
That'd just be boring, tedious.
Yeah, could you imagine? Do you know anything about J.D. Salinger? Do you want to ask me? Do you want to test me?
Where was he born?
What?
Where was he born?
It's the books of J.D. Salinger.
Okay.
Do you think they're going to ask me biographical questions like that?
I would have thought they... Yeah.
1919.
He was born in 19... But you don't know where.
What? You said when? It's 12:44. Stella's in High Peak to steer us back to Twitter. Stella, I'm being sent some very good articles now, and I've got to tell you, it doesn't look good, does it?
No. I have to admit, I opened a Mastodon account back when he.
Did you?
When he yeah.
How hard was it?
It's quite easy. You've just got to decide which server. Basically, Mastodon is not like Twitter. It's a series of cooperatives.
Yes.
So you join a cooperative, and then all of those cooperatives join together to make the Mastodon. So they're all their own individual servers with their own individual rules.
Oh, okay.
And then they all join together. And people who've come from Twitter who are used to having the ticks and everything like that are struggling to understand
How do you know
concept.
which server to join?
Well, you can just decide.
Yeah, but how? What do you base your decision on?
I made my decision because I'm a New Zealander.
Okay.
And because I'm a New Zealander, I joined the New Zealand group. But there's a journalists Mastodon, there's an art Mastodon, there's a social Mastodon. I think Stephen Fry's on the open one, on the social one, but I'm not sure. And you just join. Now you can see everybody's, but they don't do trending like they do because they're all their own individual servers.
So
and
how bad? Sorry, you continue. Forgive me.
The servers aren't owned by a company. They're run by volunteers.
Right, you are. Oh, okay. So it's a completely different kettle of fish.
Yeah, completely different. And the thing I find with the thing about the whole Twitter thing is kind of, it's like watching a slow motion. It's a bit like watching the B word. It's a slow motion car crash because what he based, for instance, he's backed by Peter Thiel. So it's 55 Tufton Street all over again.
Right.
But
that doesn't mean they'd want to torch it, does it? They wouldn't want to destroy it.
No, there was a very interesting article, and I'll find it again and share it, in Byline Times, saying, what if this is part of a plan?
Yeah, but it's a
you
bit
know,
tinfoil hatty. I like Byline Times.
Rupert Murdoch bought MySpace, didn't he? I can't remember.
Yeah, but not to close it down. It was one of his big missteps. He thought it was the future, bless him. MySpace.
Well,
so I can't buy the idea that Elon Musk has spent £44 billion to shut us up. Can you?
What he did, he had this master plan that he would open this all-in-one thing like WeChat.
Yeah.
Is in China. And I think that was his master plan. But unfortunately, the way he based, for instance, he based his sacking people, when he laid everybody off, on, for instance, with coders. He based it on the lines of code that they wrote.
Right.
Now, if you're an architect, you will only write the code that you need to design whatever it is you're designing. You're not a coder, but you're But he laid all his architects off, and then realised that
and then started asking them to come back, and then started thinking it was all some great hilarious wheeze. And the articles I'm reading today about people who've left overnight have a very funereal ring to them, and these are industry professionals who've got no interest in wanting Twitter to fail, but they are pretty much now, I think, predicting. We'll always remember that Mark Twain line, don't you, about when it was reported that he was dead, and he wrote a letter to the newspaper saying reports of my demise have been exaggerated. We may be jumping the gun a little bit, but it don't look good, does it?
No, I think. Do you know what it reminds me of? Do you remember when you were a child and you got a new toy?
Yeah.
And you played endlessly with the new toy to see if you could break it and put it back together again. That's exactly what it is, I think.
And he's just got a new toy, and he's
just got a new toy,
playing with it. So he's still enjoying himself. But which means he's not of the view that the whole thing is in mortal danger. It's under existential threat.
I don't think he realises.
Okay.
Because he hasn't got a clue. I think it was the Verge article. He hasn't got a clue on how technology runs.
So he is like someone ringing me up to say, oh, it's not that bad. He could be that, because it is. He just doesn't realise it yet because he doesn't understand enough to have a full view on what's going on. Maybe. We shall see. $44 billion, not pounds. I think I may have said pounds. Someone said, it doesn't make much difference these days. But hey-ho, it still does make some difference. There it is. And I'm being sent loads of stuff I can't really watch because it involves sound. And I'm at work. I'm in the studio. But I'll watch that video of Twitter HQ from last night in San Francisco while you enjoy this. A scrolling message outside Twitter's San Francisco headquarters has called Elon Musk a lawless oligarch, space Karen, mediocre man-child, worthless billionaire, and worse. The Verge reports hundreds, probably over 1,000 resignations, which, when you consider that the workforce had already been hugely reduced by firings, is going to be quite significant. There's a thread collecting resignation tweets from Twitter engineers, many of whom are very senior, have been at the company for a long time. Reported also this morning several members of Twitter's command center organisation, which even Musk's own transition team has identified as the linchpin that keeps Twitter operating today, have resigned today. Key infra teams have gone. Alex Heath, the editor of The Verge, and his colleague Nilay Patel are probably the best people on Twitter to follow for this. Alex tweets as @AlexEHeath and Nilay as @Reckless. Got astonishing detail from sources inside the company, but for me, at least, as an old-fashioned analog journalist, the line that ends the article is the line that resonates the most with me, which is that Twitter could not be contacted for comment because the communications team has no longer exists. That's just incredible. Twitter no longer has a communications department to contact for comment. Crazy stuff. 12:54 is the time. I interviewed Darren Brown. Do you know what? I'll tell you something funny. I must credit Eleanor Walsh, the producer of both this programme Full Disclosure podcast, because you'd think we'd have run out of people that I get excited about interviewing by now, but it just keeps getting better and better. So we did Brian Cox this week, the actor. We've already done the physicist. And last week I sat down with Darren Brown, who's just such a legend, such a lovely bloke, and such a great interview. And it keeps coming. We've got about 4 in the pipes, haven't we, that are all brilliant. Goodness knows how she does it. I know how she does it. She works incredibly hard. She's hardcore. And here is a little taste. Here is a little taste of the interview with Darren Brown. Partly because he's got a new show out, which I shall tell you a bit about. A stage show, which I'll tell you a little bit about after you have a little taster of this week's Full Disclosure. Could anyone become a hypnotist? Anyone at all?
Yeah,
really,
totally.
And I sound like one of those music teachers who says everyone could sing, and then.
Yeah, but again, not everyone. But I don't think of myself as a hypnotist. It's part of the kind of the skill set. But really, I think what I'm doing, my toolkit is much more about the stories that people are telling themselves. So there's no reason why that's beyond anybody to explore.
Was there a moment where you would have allowed yourself to think you were special then, Darren, where you would have gone, I'm doing stuff that no one else is doing?
Not quite, but I had a moment in when I was doing Miracles, so it was the previous stage show, and the second half of it was faith.
That's quite a late point. I'd have thought you might have felt it earlier than that.
No,
okay.
But it's not quite feeling of being special as such, but we'd written the show, so the second half was faith healing, as in the kind of evangelical type, stand up and walk, stand up out your wheelchair and walk kind of thing. And I'd been to see a lot of those people do those kind of shows and events, understood how it worked, but also understood that those audiences for those things are normally, properly on side. And I didn't know how well it would work with my audiences, because also we weren't going to flag up that it was going to be part of the show, because you don't want people coming to the show needing healings, right? So... And you can't rehearse it until you're doing it, because you need a large number of people, because you know it's only going to work on a certain percentage. So there was a real trial by fire with that. But as the show went on, and night after night, so within the first week, I remember there was a woman who'd been paralysed down one side of her body since she was 4 or something. And she was in her 40s, and she's in floods of tears because she can move her arm for the first time. Now, parenthesis, nothing's happening, doesn't it? If if you took an X-ray before and afterwards, clearly nothing's changed, but somehow her story that she's living out about her condition has changed in that moment, and she's realised she's actually freer than she had realised before, I guess. But it was nonetheless, very real and very profound experiences for people. So I did have a moment there of thinking, well, I could do this. You could pack out a stadium offering this and it's only a percentage of people, and then most of those people probably, by the time they've left the stage and gone home and the adrenaline's worn off, maybe that's it. But again, I was hearing from people that as time was going on and the healing, in inverted commas, had stayed. So a bit of me then was thinking, well, I could do this and offer it as this is a secular, psychological, placebo-based form of healing, but it seems to work with some people. And then I sort of felt that, that sort of red flag go off. This is, a kind of madness this is how it starts. And that's how because you start to get, and those people that do it are being seen as God. That must be part of the appeal. They're like a sort of a proxy for God in the room with these audiences. So it's not a healthy place to be. So I think it was a slight moment of near madness. But other than that, I've never felt it. So I think you're very aware of the amount of technique that goes into it and the amount of illusion building. So you're not really under any false illusions yourself, because you're very aware of the work that's going into making something look more powerful than it really is.
It's an amazing interview. He's an amazing man, and you can see his new show, Showman, in London. It's at the Apollo Theatre on Shaftesbury Avenue from 9th of December to the 18th of March next year. That is some residency, isn't it? And he considers it to be his best show yet. I also, full disclosure, he really goes there, doesn't he? He really gives us real insights into how he thinks and what he does. Although I mentioned Brian Cox earlier in the programme, because the actor has done Full Disclosure this week. I loved it. The physicist did it a couple of months ago, and didn't do full disclosure, because I was with the broadcasting legend Chris Evans yesterday, who was working at Piccadilly Radio in Manchester as a sort of T-boy, essentially, for Timmy Mallet. You remember Timmy Mallet? So I knew that about Chris Evans, and I knew that Brian Cox had been a pop star before he'd been a physicist. What I didn't know, and didn't come up in the interview, and now I feel I somehow missed a trick, was that Brian Cox, the physicist, was a sort of junior member of staff on that show, that Timmy Mallet radio show on Piccadilly Radio in Manchester back in the day. Because I presume because of his love of music. And I don't think that came up in the interview. How on earth did I miss that? So I need to put a little warning on the full disclosure with Brian Cox that we didn't actually achieve full disclosure, because a fascinating little tidbit of information about him was missing entirely from the interview, and it was only pointed out to me by the broadcasting legend that is Chris Evans, who took me and Steve Allen out for lunch yesterday, which was one of the best times, most fun I've had in a very, very, very long while. Although he will not be coming on full disclosure. He was fairly adamant about that, unfortunately. Brian Cox wants to. This is a lovely text. So, hi, James. Just waiting for the call so you can get your hat trick. Cheers. Brian Cox, Emeritus Professor of Pharmaceutical Chemistry at the University of Sussex. Maybe one day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Global Player, where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as the world's biggest podcasts, such as Full Disclosure. Download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, Tom Swarbrick. But now it's time for Sankita Maiska. 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 For Sankita Maiska, 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 for Sankita